The chain was cold against her wrist. Alara Voss noticed that first, not the faces of the men who had come for her, not the dark color of the van parked outside her family's gates, not even the sound of her eldest sister Lena laughing somewhere inside the house while Alara stood barefoot on the gravel with her hands being bound. She noticed the cold of the metal, how it bit into the inside of her wrist like a question she had never thought to ask. She had been asleep when they came. 3 in the morning, the kind of hour that belongs to secrets. Someone had turned off her bedroom light before they opened the door, which meant someone inside the house had told them which room was hers. She had not screamed. She had not fought. She had looked at the 2 men standing in her doorway and felt, deep in her chest, a kind of dull recognition, as if she had always known this moment was coming and had simply been too tired to imagine it clearly. Her name was Alara. She was 22 years old. She had lived in the Ashwood Pack territory her entire life, in a house that smelled of cedar and her mother's perfume, with a father who looked through her, and 2 sisters who had never once looked back when they walked out of a room she was already in. She had no wolf. That was the first thing people said when they talked about her, if they talked about her at all. No wolf, no rank, no future. In the world of shifter packs, a woman without her wolf was considered incomplete, a placeholder. The polite word was dormant. The word people actually used was less kind. Her sisters had shifted at 16. Lena's wolf was pale gold, tall and proud, and every elder in the Ashwood Pack had stood straighter when she ran for the first time. Kara's was darker, red-brown and fast, and she had been promised to the son of a border alpha before she was 18. They were known. They were wanted. They were the daughters of Alpha Voss, and everyone within 3 territories understood exactly what that meant. Alara was also the daughter of Alpha Voss. No one brought that up. She sat in the back of the van now with her wrists bound loosely in front of her, a blanket draped across her shoulders that she suspected was meant to look like kindness rather than warmth. One of the men had given it to her without meeting her eyes. She had accepted it the same way, politely, carefully, the way she had learned to accept everything in her life, with both hands and no expectations. The road outside the van's small back window moved in darkness. She did not know how long they had been driving. She had not asked. She was thinking about the document she had seen on her father's desk 6 days ago. She had not been meant to see it. She had gone into the study to return a book she had borrowed from the lower shelf, a habit of hers, borrowing and returning, always careful to leave things exactly as she found them. The document had been sitting open on the desk, 3 pages long, with a formal Ironmore Pack seal at the top. She had read only the first paragraph before she heard her father's footsteps in the hall, and put the book down and walked out through the side door. 1 paragraph had been enough. Peace exchange. Territory concessions. 1 unmated female, given freely. In good faith. In acknowledgement of the border dispute of the prior season. She had not known, then, that the name written at the bottom of the 3rd page was hers. She had suspected. But suspicion and knowing are different things, and she had chosen, for 6 more days, to live in suspicion. To eat at the table where her family ate. To sit in the garden in the early evenings with her book and her cold tea. To pretend that the looks her sisters gave each other across the dinner table were about something else entirely. On the 7th day, the men had come. Now she was in this van, and the chain was cold against her wrist, and she was not surprised. That was perhaps the saddest part of it. She was not surprised at all. The Ironmore Pack territory was 7 hours northeast of Ashwood. She knew this from maps she had studied as a child, back when she still believed that knowing things would eventually protect her from things. The terrain changed as the van moved. She could feel it even without seeing it, the shift in the quality of the air, the way the road became less even. By the time the van stopped, the sky outside her small window had begun to lighten into the gray that comes before dawn. The door opened. One of the men offered her his hand. She did not take it. She stepped out on her own and stood on a gravel road that looked very much like the one she had left, except colder, except unfamiliar, except surrounded on all sides by pine trees so dark they looked almost black in the early morning light. There was a compound ahead of her, not a house, a compound, stone walls, iron fencing, buildings arranged with the particular efficiency of a place designed for function rather than comfort. Men and women moved around its edges with the ease of people on a familiar path. Several of them looked at her, none of them spoke. A woman came forward from the main building. She was perhaps 45, with short gray-streaked hair and the kind of face that has decided, at some point, that it does not need to arrange itself around other people's comfort. She looked Alara over with the blank assessment of someone reading the details off a form. "Alara Voss," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Alara said. "I'm Hilda. I manage the domestic staff and the guest arrangements here. A pause. Deliberate. You'll be in the East Wing. You're expected to attend meals, to follow compound rules, and to stay within the eastern fence line until further notice. Is that understood? Yes, Alara said again. Hilda studied her for a moment longer, as if waiting for protest or tears, or some form of reaction that would require additional management. Alara gave her none. After a moment, Hilda nodded once and turned to lead her inside. The East Wing was at the far end of the main building, separated from the rest of the compound by a long corridor with stone floors that echoed. The room she was given was small but clean. A bed, a window that faced the pine trees, a desk, a wardrobe with 2 clean changes of clothing folded on the top shelf. Someone had thought ahead, or someone had done this before. The chain was removed from her wrist before she went inside. The marks it left were already fading. Her skin recovered quickly, always had, one of those small, stubborn gifts that her body gave her without explanation. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after Hilda left. She did not cry, not because she wasn't hurt, but because the hurt was too large and too complicated for the simple relief of tears. It had too many faces, her father's handwriting on that document, her sister Lena's laugh from inside the house while she was being taken, her mother's bedroom door that had been closed and dark and silent. The hurt had been building for 22 years. Crying now would be like trying to empty a lake with a teacup. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and let herself think. The Ironmore pack was larger than Ashwood. That much was known. It was led by an alpha named Grant Cooper, who had a reputation for being effective and cold and entirely uninterested in appearances. The border dispute he had used as leverage against her father had something to do with a stretch of river valley that both packs had claimed for 3 generations, without either side formally resolving it. Her father had apparently decided that giving away a daughter he didn't want was a reasonable solution to a territorial problem he didn't want to solve. She wondered if he had thought about it for long. She decided probably not. The pine trees outside her window moved in the early morning wind. Their sound was like a low, constant exhale. She found it, unexpectedly, not unpleasant. She had always liked the sound of wind through trees. It was one of those small things that asked nothing of her. She thought about her scar. It was on her collarbone, on the left side, just below the joint of her neck. It had been there since she was 8 years old. Not a wide scar, not dramatic, just a thin, pale line about 2 inches long. She had no memory of getting it. One morning it had simply been there, already healed, already faded to white. Her mother had taken her to the pack healer, who had looked at it and said nothing conclusive. Her father had looked at it and walked out of the room. Lena had called it weird. Kara had not mentioned it. Over the years, Alara had found that it was warm sometimes. Not painful, not irritating, just warm, like a small ember sitting under her skin. It happened rarely, without pattern, without reason she could identify. She had learned to notice it the way she learned to notice other things that had no explanation, quietly, without expectation, and without mentioning it to anyone. As she lay there in the thin gray morning of the Ironmore compound, the scar grew warm. She pressed 2 fingers to it through her shirt. The warmth was steady, low, almost like a pulse. She could not explain it. She closed her eyes and concentrated on it, the way she sometimes did when it happened, and let herself feel it without trying to understand it. Then she heard footsteps in the corridor outside, and she took her fingers away, and the warmth faded by the time the footsteps passed her door. She was here. This was her life now. She had been sold by the people who were supposed to protect her, dropped into a foreign pack's territory, and given a small room facing pine trees. She took a slow breath. Then she got up and looked at the clothing in the wardrobe. She picked the darker shirt. She pulled her hair back with the tie she'd had around her wrist since the night before. She found the bathroom at the end of the hall, washed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. She looked like herself. That was something. She went to find out where the kitchen was. The kitchen of the Ironmore main building was not hard to find. She followed the smell of coffee and the sound of low voices and found a large room with stone countertops and a long wooden table where 6 people were already sitting, eating and talking in the way that people talk when they are comfortable with one another. They were all low-ranking pack members, she guessed from their manner. The ease of people who have no particular authority but also no particular fear. They went quiet when she appeared in the doorway. "The Ashwood girl," one of them said. A young man, maybe 20, with a wide, honest face and light hair. He was not being mean about it. He was simply identifying her the way you identify a new thing when you see it. "Alara," she said. "Alara." He nodded, as if logging this. "I'm Owen. That's Maggie. Dev, Susie, Glenn. And the one who won't look up from her bowl is Nina." Nina did not look up from her bowl. The others offered small waves or nods. "Sit down if you want." There's oatmeal and the coffee's still hot. She sat. She ate. She did not speak much and no one pressed her to. But she listened, and in the way that she had always gathered information, quietly, without anyone noticing that she was doing it, she began to learn the shape of this place from the inside. The Ironmore compound housed approximately 40 permanent pack members, with another 30 in the surrounding territory. Grant Cooper had been Alpha for 11 years. He was respected but not warm. The pack was organized, disciplined, effective. There had not been an internal conflict in over 6 years. The border dispute with Ashwood was one of 3 ongoing territorial situations that Cooper was managing simultaneously, which was why, Owen explained without being asked, he had sorted it the quick way, rather than dragging it through another 2 years of meetings. Ilara sat with her coffee and her oatmeal and absorbed all of this without expression. "Is it true you don't have a wolf?" Maggie asked at some point. She asked it the same way she might ask if Ilara took sugar in her coffee. Practical, without cruelty. "I haven't shifted yet," Ilara said carefully. Maggie chewed her toast. "That's unusual." "Yes," Ilara agreed. No one pressed further. The conversation moved on to something about a supply delivery that was 2 days late, and whether Dev had remembered to call about it. Dev had not remembered to call about it. Dev was defensive about this. Nina, still not looking up from her bowl, said something quietly devastating in 3 words that made everyone at the table laugh. Ilara felt the edge of a smile at the corner of her mouth. She let it happen. She had been here 6 hours, and she was alive, and she had coffee, and there were people here who made each other laugh. It was not hope exactly, but it was something adjacent to it. She thought of Lena's laugh while she was being taken, and pressed her foot against the floor and felt the cold stone through her sock, and made herself stay in this room, this morning, this moment. She was here. She had survived it. She would keep surviving it. She picked up her mug with both hands and drank her coffee, and looked out the kitchen's single small window at the pine trees, which were the same pine trees as before, still moving, still exhaling. The scar on her collarbone was warm again. She ignored it, and listened to Dev argue about the supply delivery, and decided she would explore the eastern yard after breakfast. The compound was more interesting than it looked from the outside. She discovered this over the following 4 days, moving carefully within the boundaries she had been given, watching. The east yard had a training area, a cleared space of packed earth where pack members sparred in the mornings, which she watched from a distance the first day, and from slightly closer on the second. The sparring was controlled, technical, not the wild dominance display she had expected from what she knew of larger packs. These people trained like people who took training seriously. There was also a small library in the east wing. She found it on the second day, 3 shelves of books in a room that smelled of old paper and dust and something faintly resinous, like pine sap. The books were a strange mix: military history, plant ecology, several veterinary manuals, and what appeared to be an extensive collection of romance novels that someone had clearly tried to hide behind the military history and failed. She pulled one of the ecology books and took it back to her room. She was permitted outside the building but not beyond a low stone wall that marked the eastern boundary. On the 3rd day she stood at that wall for a long time and looked at the pine forest beyond it, breathing the cold smell of it, and thought about what it would mean to be able to run. Not to escape, just to run. To move through space with speed and intention and no one watching. She had dreamed of her wolf since she was old enough to understand what a wolf was, dreamed of the shift, the change, the feeling she had been told about by Lena and Kara with their casual pride, of how everything opens up, how the world becomes vivid and immediate and absolutely true. She had listened to those descriptions the way a person listens to someone describe a color they have never seen, believing it, wanting it, unable to fully imagine it. She put her hand on the stone wall and felt its roughness, and did not think about running. She looked at the trees instead. On the 4th day, she met Owen properly. He was doing something with a truck engine near the eastern outbuilding when she walked past. He called out to her, not in the way of someone who needs help, but in the way of someone who simply does not like comfortable silence. She stopped. He showed her the engine with the clear enthusiasm of someone who does not care whether you share the enthusiasm but enjoys it enough to share anyway. She found, to her own mild surprise, that she did not mind listening. He had a way of explaining things that assumed you were intelligent and simply did not know yet. "You're very quiet," he said at some point, handing her a wrench she did not need. She held it anyway. "I'm listening," she said. "What are you listening to?" "Everything," she said. "I'm new here. Listening seems smarter than talking." He considered this seriously. The way she was learning he considered most things. "That's fair," he said. "What have you learned so far?" That Cooper doesn't come to the morning meals, that whoever is in charge of the supply schedule needs help, that Nina is significantly sharper than she lets on, that the fence on the south side of the east yard is older than the rest and makes a different sound in the wind. Owen stared at her, then he laughed, not unkindly. You'd have made a good scout, he said. My father used me as a bargaining chip, she said. Not quite the same thing. The words came out flatter than she had intended. Owen's face changed, not into pity, which she could not have tolerated, but into something simpler and more honest. Acknowledgement. He nodded once and turned back to the engine, and did not press her, and she was glad. She handed back the wrench. The Alpha King is coming, Owen said, without looking up. End of next week. There's a border dispute with the Northern Pack that Cooper wants resolved through proper channels this time. King will mediate. Ilara filed this away. The Alpha King, she repeated. Caius Drin, Owen said the name the way everyone in the shifter world said it. With a particular care, the way you handle something with edges. He oversees all 4 territory regions. Comes maybe twice a year. Entire compound gets formal when he's here. What's he like? She asked. Owen was quiet for a moment. He's fair, he said finally. He's the fairest person I've ever watched work. He doesn't take sides and he doesn't miss anything. But he stopped, searched for the word. He's very much himself. There's no space near him where you forget who he is. Ilara thought about this. That sounds like someone worth watching, she said. Owen glanced at her sideways. Just don't let him catch you watching him. He doesn't like being studied. I'll be careful, she said. She said it lightly, but she meant it. She had spent 22 years being careful. She was very good at it. She walked back to the east wing as the afternoon light fell sideways through the pines, and the scar on her collarbone pulsed once, warm and brief, like a word spoken too quietly to hear. She pressed her fingers to it and kept walking. 7 days later, the Alpha King's convoy arrived at the Ironmore Gate, and Ilara was standing at her east wing window folding laundry she did not particularly need to fold, and she watched the convoy come in, and even from this distance, across the yard, through glass, she saw the man who stepped out of the middle vehicle, and the scar on her collarbone went from warm to burning, white-hot and immediate, and she dropped the shirt she was holding. Her hand went to her collarbone. The burning did not stop. The man across the yard, tall, dark-coated, moving with the kind of unhurried certainty that takes up space without trying, did not look toward her window. Not yet. She picked up the shirt, folded it, set it on the bed, stood very still and breathed. The week after his arrival changed the compound in the way that gravity changes a room, everything subtly rearranged toward a new center. Ilara saw it in the way the staff moved, the way conversations shortened and straightened, the way Hilda went about her daily route with an additional few degrees of precision. She herself did not alter her routine. She woke early, ate in the kitchen with Owen and the others, walked the east yard, read in the small library, helped Dev with the supply schedule, because no one else had thought to and it clearly needed doing. She did not seek out the Alpha King. She did not attend any of the formal meetings that were held in the main hall. She was not invited to them, and she did not expect to be. She heard him before she saw him properly. She was in the library on the second day after his arrival, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the ecology book and a cup of tea that had gone cold, when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not Owen's footsteps, not Maggie's or Dev's. These were slower and more measured, with a weight to them that had nothing to do with physical heaviness. She did not look up from her book. The footsteps stopped outside the library door. A pause. Then the door opened. She looked up. He was taller than she had estimated from the window, dark hair, strong face, the kind of jaw that suggests a person has made a great many unpleasant decisions and not apologized for any of them. He was in a plain dark sweater and trousers, not the formal coat she had seen from the window, and he was looking at the shelves when he came in, not at her. Then he saw her, sitting on the floor, with a cold cup of tea and an ecology textbook. She looked back at him with the expression she had developed over years of being looked through by important people, pleasant, neutral, mildly attentive. The expression of someone who expects nothing in particular and is therefore very hard to surprise. The Alpha King, Caius Dren, 3 territories, the fairest person Owen had ever watched work, looked at her for one long moment without speaking. And the scar on Ilara's collarbone went white-hot again, so immediately and completely that she had to concentrate very hard on not reacting. His expression did not change, but something shifted at the back of his eyes, like a door opening in a room where he had expected to find nothing. The library, he said, and his voice was exactly what Owen had not quite described, deep and even. with the quality of something that has decided to be calm and means it. I didn't realize it was occupied. I can leave, she said. No. He said it quickly. One word. Then, more carefully. I'm looking for a specific book. I'll be out of your way. She watched him scan the shelves. He moved the way she watched him move from the window, without any unnecessary motion. He found what he was looking for on the second shelf, pulled it out, looked at the cover, put it under his arm. He looked at her again. She was still on the floor. You're not Ironmore, he said. No, she said. He waited. She did not elaborate. His eyes moved to her collarbone for one brief fraction of a second, so brief she almost missed it. Almost. Alara Voss, she said, because the silence had become a question she could answer. Ashwood Pack. Transferred here 11 days ago. Something in the line of his jaw tightened. It was not anger exactly. It was something more considered than that. A private calculation that landed somewhere she couldn't read. I see, he said. He left. The door closed behind him. The scar on her collarbone was still burning. She sat very still for a moment. Then she looked down at her book and tried to find the sentence she had left off on, which took considerably longer than it should have, because she could not quite remember what language was for. He found her again the next morning. She was in the east yard before breakfast, which was her habit, 15 minutes in the cold air before the compound fully woke. She was sitting on the low wall with her arms wrapped around herself and her face turned up to the pale early light because she liked the feeling of it. She heard him coming and did not turn around. He came to stand beside the wall, not on the yard side but on the outside, among the pine needles, close enough that she was aware of him without being crowded by him. She looked sideways. He was looking at the trees. You're here early, he said. I like the morning, she said. A pause. Most people in this compound don't come out here until after 7. I know. That's part of why I like it. He was quiet for a moment. The pine trees moved in the early wind. The sky was going from gray to a thin pale gold at the edges. How long has Ashwood been sending people to Ironmore as exchange terms? He asked. The question was conversational. It was not conversational. I don't know how long they have been, she said. I know it happened once. 11 days ago. Once is enough, he said. She looked at him directly then. He was already looking at her. The early light made his face very clear and very difficult to read, and she thought of what Owen had said. There's no space near him where you forget who he is. She understood that now. He occupied the present tense in a way that made the present tense more real. It wasn't done to hurt me, she said, and was mildly surprised to find she believed it. It was done because I was available and they needed something available. That's different. Not significantly, he said. She did not answer that. He was not wrong. He looked away toward the trees again. You were reading plant ecology yesterday, he said. Why? The library had it. I take what the library has. She paused. Why were you in the library? Same reason, he said. She almost smiled. She did not quite. What did you take? He reached into the pocket of his coat and showed her the spine. Military history. She looked at it. He put it away. The romance novels are behind the military history, she said. A very brief pause. I noticed, he said. She did smile then, small and private, looking at the pine trees. She heard something almost like a breath from him, not quite a laugh, but the shape of one. The morning light was warming. Somewhere inside the compound a door opened and closed. I'm here for 9 more days, he said. There is a meeting tomorrow regarding the northern border dispute. I'm told Cooper intends to raise the matter of the Ashwood exchange agreement. She went still, not visibly, internally. Why? She asked carefully. Because it affects Ironmore's standing in the territory hierarchy. A peace exchange that involves an unranked, unshifted female from a rival pack is not what Ironmore presented to the council. Cooper is covering something. He said it without inflection, as if he were reading from a document. I need to know if you have any information about what that agreement actually says. She thought about the first paragraph. The Ironmore seal. The formal language. One unmated female. Given freely. I saw the first page, she said. Just the first paragraph. Tell me what it said. She told him. He listened with the absolute stillness of someone recording every word and sorting it simultaneously. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. That's enough, he said. Well, not dismissive, definitive. It was enough information to work with. She could see him already working with it. What happens at the meeting? She asked. I'll listen, he said, and then I'll make a decision. About me? He looked at her. Directly, steadily, with that quality she was beginning to identify as simply the way he looked at things he thought mattered. Yes, he said. She nodded once. She did not ask what the decision might be. She had learned long ago that asking about futures you cannot control is a way of giving away energy you need for the present. She looked at the pine trees. He stayed another few minutes, not speaking, just standing there in the early morning light with his hands in his pockets, and the weight of whatever he was thinking settling somewhere around him like weather. Then he said, "Eat breakfast," which was an odd thing to say, and also, she realized, the most personally directed thing anyone in the Ironmore compound had said to her since she arrived. He walked back toward the main building. She sat on the wall for another moment. The scar on her collarbone was warm. Not burning anymore, just warm. She pressed her fingers to it and breathed the cold pine air, and thought about a man who had looked at her like she was something worth paying attention to, and made herself not build anything out of that yet, because building things had always cost her more than they returned. She got down from the wall and went to find breakfast. The kitchen was warm and Owen was arguing with Dev again, and Nina was not looking up from her bowl, and Maggie slid a mug of coffee toward her as she sat down without being asked. "You look like you had an interesting morning," Maggie said. "I was sitting outside," Ilara said. Maggie said, and looked at her with the look of someone who knows there is more and has decided not to push it. "There's oatmeal." "Thank you," Ilara said. She ate her oatmeal. She drank her coffee. She listened to Owen and Dev and let the warmth of the room settle around her, and she did not think about gray gold morning light or military history, or the particular way a person can look at you like you are more than you have been told you are. She did not think about it at all. The meeting happened the next afternoon, and Ilara was not in it, but the compound felt it anyway. She was in the library when the voices began in the hall, controlled but elevated, the kind of voices that belong to men who are trying to remain professional while being genuinely at odds. She could not make out words through the stone walls. She did not try. She kept her book open on her knees and listened to the rhythm of it instead, the way you listen to a storm through glass. Owen found her there an hour later, when the voices had stopped. He sat down across from her in the room's single chair and said nothing for a moment, which was unusual enough that she put her book down and looked at him. "Cooper tried to claim you were here voluntarily," Owen said, "as a goodwill visit. Said the exchange agreement had been misrepresented by Ashwood." He was looking at the ceiling. He had paperwork. "The original document said I was given freely in settlement of the border claim," she said. "I saw it." "I know. And apparently so did the Alpha King." Owen looked at her. "He had his own copy. A courier had it here within 12 hours of his arrival. I don't know how he got it." She thought about this. About a man who had walked into a library and spent 4 minutes establishing what he needed from her, and then went and got his own documentation within the day. "What happened?" she asked. "Cooper has 48 hours to formally retract the claim that you're here as a guest and reclassify your status under territory transfer law." Owen paused. "Under transfer law you'd have rights. You couldn't be held here without PAC documentation from Ashwood, acknowledging the terms and your formal agreement to them." "I never formally agreed," she said. "That's what the Alpha King said." She was quiet. She could feel the weight of it settling. Not excitement, not relief, something more careful than either. This was not over. This was the beginning of something being taken apart, and things being taken apart had a way of cutting in every direction, not just the useful ones. "What does he want from this?" she asked. Owen frowned. "What do you mean?" "He doesn't know me. He's been here 3 days. Why does he care about the terms of one exchange agreement between 2 mid-sized packs?" She said it plainly because it was a plain question. She had learned that important people who appear to help without reason are either building a debt or finding something out, and she needed to know which this was. Owen thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. "I don't know," he said. "I've watched him work for 2 years. He's fair. Genuinely fair. Not the kind that's fair to the powerful. But I've never seen him move this fast on a personal matter." He looked at her with the honest face she had come to trust. "Whatever it is, I don't think it's about the PAC law." She nodded slowly. She did not say what she was thinking. She pressed 2 fingers to her collarbone, briefly, where the scar had been warm all day. Something was happening. Something that had been waiting a long time to happen. She could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives, not in the sky, not in any single place, but in the air itself, in the quality of now. She was not afraid. She was not hopeful exactly. She was paying attention. She said goodnight to Owen and walked back to her room with the ecology book under her arm, and outside her window the pines moved in the dark wind, and she lay down without changing the light and looked at the ceiling, and let herself feel the warmth in her scar, and did not try to explain it. She was here, she was seen, she was something, even if she did not yet know what. Tomorrow the 48 hours would begin. She closed her eyes and let the sound of the pines carry her into sleep. The 48 hours passed like a held breath. Grant Cooper spent most of them in his office with the door closed and his senior advisors cycling in and out with the expressions of people who have been told to find a solution to something that does not have a comfortable solution. Elara knew this because Owen knew it, and Owen knew it because the compound had the kind of internal information flow that large organized groups always develop, not gossip exactly, but the collective awareness of a community that understands its own pulse. She kept to her routine. East Yard in the morning, library in the afternoon, kitchen in the evenings. She slept adequately. She ate adequately. She did not go looking for Caius Dren, and he did not come to find her, and she concentrated on not thinking about either of those facts. On the morning of the second day, Hilda came to her room before breakfast. She stood in the doorway with the exact same face she had worn when Elara arrived, blank, efficient, assembled. She held a document. She extended it. Alpha Cooper has submitted a formal reclassification of your status under Ironmore Territory Transfer Law, Hilda said. You are now registered as a transferred resident rather than a peace exchange participant. The distinction means you have the right to formal documentation, access to PAC dispute channels, and the right to refuse permanent residency. A pause. You are also no longer required to remain within the East Wing boundary. Elara took the document. She read it carefully, every word, which took several minutes while Hilda waited without impatience. It said what Hilda had said it said. She looked at the Alpha King's signature at the bottom. It was neat and without flourish. Practical handwriting. She had expected nothing different. Thank you, she said. Breakfast is at 7, Hilda said, and left. Elara sat on the edge of the bed with the document in her lap and let herself feel what she felt, which was complicated. The document did not undo anything. She was still here, still without her pack, still separated from everything familiar by 7 hours, and a decision that had been made about her, without her. But she had legal status now. She had paperwork. She had a signature from the most powerful alpha on the continent, acknowledging that she existed and had rights. It was not freedom, but it was something to stand on. She folded the document and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, against her ribs, where she could feel it if she breathed too deep. Then she went to breakfast. She took the longer route through the main corridor, the one she had not been permitted to use before. It ran along the eastern side of the main building and had tall windows that faced a different yard, a wider open space she had not seen yet, with a stone training circle at its center and a row of covered storage buildings along the far edge. 3 PAC members were already training in the circle despite the early hour, 2 women and a man, moving through something technical and controlled that was not quite sparring, and not quite a form but something in between. She slowed to watch. She was not aware she had slowed until she realized she had stopped entirely, standing at the window with her jacket collar up against the morning cold that came through the glass, watching the movement in the circle with an attention she could not entirely account for. There was something in the pattern of it, the geometry of how the 3 bodies moved in relation to each other, that her body seemed to understand before her mind did. She could feel, watching them, where the next movement would go, could feel the logic of it, the correct line. She had never been trained to fight. She had never been trained to do anything, really, in the way that PAC children are trained. She was the daughter without a wolf, and training a daughter without a wolf felt, to her family, approximately as practical as teaching a person who cannot swim to sail. But standing at this window, she could feel the pattern as if she already knew it. You're blocking the corridor. She turned. Caius Dren was behind her, 3 feet back, also apparently heading toward breakfast. He was in his dark coat again. He looked at the training circle, then at her. Sorry, she said, and stepped aside. He did not walk past. He stood beside her at the window and looked at the circle. One of the women had just redirected an overhead strike from the man in a way that used almost no visible effort, just a slight pivot and a redirect of his momentum against itself, and the man stumbled and had to recover quickly. Do you train? He asked. No one ever taught me, she said. A pause. Do you want to? She looked at him. The question was simple and the tone was level, and she had no way of knowing if he was offering or simply asking, and both options made her careful. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He looked at the circle again. He said, which was not an answer but also was not nothing. They stood there for a moment, not long, 30 seconds maybe, watching the training, and it was the most comfortable 30 seconds she had experienced in Ironmore. possibly because no one was asking her to perform anything. Then he inclined his head slightly in the direction of the corridor, and they both continued toward the kitchen. He did not eat in the kitchen with the lower-ranked staff, she knew that. He had a separate meal arrangement with Cooper and his own advisors. She expected him to branch off at some point in the corridor. Instead, he walked with her all the way to the kitchen door and stopped there while she pushed it open. Owen looked up from the table. He looked at Caius. He looked at Alara. A succession of expressions crossed his face that he had the sense to keep brief. He looked back down at his oatmeal. "Good morning," Owen said to the middle distance. "Good morning," Caius said, which was apparently not what Owen expected, because he looked up again. Caius looked at Alara. "The document I sent this morning is the first step. There will be others. I'll need your formal statement within the next 3 days." "What kind of statement?" she asked. "Your account of how the transfer agreement was presented to you, and whether you were given opportunity to refuse." He said it quietly, not because he was uncomfortable with the subject, but because it was a private matter, and he was handling it as such. "It's documentation, not testimony. No one will question you directly." She nodded. "All right." He looked at her for one more moment. That quality again, the door opening, the real attention. Then he turned and walked back down the corridor. The kitchen was entirely silent. "Oatmeal?" Maggie said finally, with the focused energy of someone choosing to ignore everything she had just seen. "Please," Alara said. She sat down. Nina was looking at her. This was notable, because Nina never looked at anything directly. Alara looked back. Nina looked down at her bowl. The air was extremely charged, and everyone was working very hard to pretend it was not. "He called you by name," Dev said. "He has a copy of the transfer document," Alara said. "He knows everyone's name. He's been here 4 days and he knows my face, but I'm not sure he knows my name," Dev said. "Dev," Owen said. "I'm just saying." "Dev," Owen said again. Dev went back to his toast. Alara ate her oatmeal and looked at the window and did not say anything, because she did not have anything certain to say, and she had always believed that certainty was something you owed the things you said. She was not yet certain about anything except the warmth in her scar and the quality of 30 seconds at a corridor window and the strange feeling of being seen. She did not build anything out of it. She had promised herself she wouldn't. She wrote the formal statement that afternoon in the library, longhand, in the clearest language she could find. She described the van arriving at 3 in the morning, the chain, the document on her father's desk, the way no one in her family had been present when she was taken except as an absence, her mother's dark door, her sister's laughter from another room, her father not coming outside at all. She wrote it plainly, without ornamentation, without the weight of feeling she was not putting into it. She read it over twice, then she folded it and sealed it with the pen cap pressed flat, which was the only seal she had, and left it at the door of the administration room for Hilda to pass on. Then she went and stood at the window above the training circle, which was empty now in the late afternoon, and looked at the packed earth of it, and tried to feel the geometry of those movements again. She could. It was still there, some knowledge in the body that had no reference in her life, a map to a country she had never visited. She pressed her fingers to her collarbone, steady warmth. She went to dinner. In the evenings, the kitchen became something different. The mid-ranked pack members ate separately, with Cooper's group in the formal dining hall. What was left was the low table, 6 or 8 people, mismatched chairs, the end of the day's energy. Glenn usually brought something extra, bread from the afternoon bake, or fruit from the store. Dev complained about something. Owen argued about it genially. Nina contributed 3 devastating words per evening and nothing more. On the 5th evening, a woman Alara hadn't seen before came into the kitchen and sat at the far end of the table. She was older, 60 perhaps, with the bearing of someone who had been high-ranked and had stepped back from it at some point and retained the posture without the pressure. She introduced herself as Agnes and ate her dinner without explaining herself, which no one asked her to. After a while, Agnes looked at Alara and said, "You're the Ashwood girl." "I'm Alara," she said. "Yes." Agnes chewed thoughtfully. "I knew your grandmother." Alara went very still. "My mother's mother?" she said, because she had 2 grandmothers, and one of them had died before she was born, and the other had been a quiet woman in Ashwood's northern settlement, who had died when Alara was 5, and left her only a smell, lavender and pine resin, and a pale blue scarf. "Your father's mother," Agnes said. "Vera." Vera. Her father's mother had been Vera. Alara had never known this name. Her father did not talk about his own family. She had always understood, in the way you understand things no one explicitly tells you, that this was deliberate. "I didn't know her name," Alara said carefully. Agnes looked at her with the clear eyes of someone who has decided that a thing needs to be said. Vera was not from Ashwood originally. She came from the old northern packs. There's a line in those packs, the Luna bloodline they call it, though it's not been called that openly in 30 years. Her grandmother carried it. Vera carried it. It passes through the firstborn of firstborns, not always, but often. Ilara's mouth was dry. What does it mean? She asked, which was the wrong question, which was the right question. It means, Agnes said slowly, like someone measuring out something precious, that a wolf delayed is not a wolf absent, and that the mark you were born with is not a scar from nothing. Ilara's hand went to her collarbone without her deciding to move it. Agnes watched this with the expression of someone who has had their understanding confirmed. Who else knows this? Ilara asked. Not many, Agnes said, and no one in Ashwood that I'm aware of. Your father may know what his mother was, but he never spoke of it openly. Ashwood's elders would have considered it ancient history. She paused. The Alpha King's pack records go back further than any other on the continent. He keeps archivists. The words settled into Ilara's chest like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading outward. Why are you telling me? She asked. Agnes looked at her steadily. Because you should know what you are before someone else decides for you. She picked up her cup. Again. The word again sat in the air between them. Ilara did not flinch from it. Thank you, she said. Agnes drank her tea. Eat your dinner, she said. You're too thin. Ilara ate her dinner. Around her, Owen and Dev had picked up some argument about fence maintenance, and the normal texture of the evening reasserted itself, and she sat inside it and felt the warmth in her scar like something she now had a different language for. Not a mystery, a dormancy, a locked room that had always had a key. She lay awake that night for a long time. She thought about the word Luna. She thought about Vera, a woman she had never known, a grandmother her father had erased by simply never speaking of her. She thought about her father's handwriting on the transfer document, and about how deeply incurious you would have to be about your own child to not know what that child might carry. Or perhaps the more accurate thing was this: how thoroughly you could decide not to know, if the knowing inconvenienced you. She thought about Caius Dren and his archivists, and the question of whether the careful attention he paid her was a thing he paid everyone or a thing particular to her, and she did not come to a conclusion because she did not have enough information and she would not guess. She pressed her hand flat against her collarbone. The warmth was there, steady as a heartbeat. What you are before someone else decides for you. She was 22 years old. She had been decided for, given away, transferred, reclassified. She had been a placeholder and a bargaining chip and an inconvenience. She was also, apparently, something older than any of that, something that had been waiting in her blood while her life moved around it, unchanged, untouched, entirely patient. She closed her eyes. She breathed slowly. She let the thought of it exist without trying to make it mean something immediate. Outside, the pines moved. In the morning, she went to the training circle. It was empty at that hour. She had checked for 3 mornings running, and it was always empty at 6, the regular training group not arriving until 7. She stood at the edge of the packed earth for a moment, feeling the cold, feeling the strange pull of the space, and then she stepped in. She did not know what she was doing, not technically. She stood in the center and breathed, and let her body have the geometry she had seen through the window, and she began to move. It was not graceful. It was not fast. It was uncertain and private and more than a little strange, standing in an empty circle in the early cold, moving through patterns she had never been taught. But the patterns were there in her somewhere, like words in a language she had never formally studied but had always heard. She moved for 20 minutes. When she stopped, her breathing was elevated and her hands were trembling slightly. And it was not entirely from cold. She became aware that she was not alone. She turned. Caius Dren was at the edge of the circle. He was in a training shirt and had clearly been heading elsewhere when he passed this way. He was watching her with the same expression she was learning to read. The door, slightly open. She had been watched before. Her whole life she had been watched by people who were deciding she was insufficient. This was not the same kind of watching. How long have you known those forms? He asked. I don't know them properly, she said. I've been watching through the window. You were moving through a modified form of Northern Pack combat training, he said. The third sequence you did is not common. It's been out of circulation for about 40 years. The only pack that still teaches it is... He stopped. She watched him reach a conclusion she could see but not read. His jaw tightened. It's in your body, he said, not quite to her. Already. Agnes told me about the Luna line, she said. She said it carefully, like putting something fragile down. Last night. He was very still. How much did she tell you? Enough to ask better questions. She paused. Your archivists have records. Yes, he said. About my grandmother, about the bloodline. A silence. The morning was cold and clear, and the pines beyond the yard smelled of sap and dark earth. He looked at her with the absolute steadiness that she was beginning to think might simply be how he looked at true things. Yes, he said again. And you knew before you came here, she said. Not an accusation, a question shaped like a statement. I knew there was a Luna line descendant in this region, he said carefully. I didn't know it was you until I walked into that building and… He stopped, looked away toward the trees for one moment, then back, until I knew. She stood in the packed earth of the training circle and breathed cold air and felt the warmth in her collarbone and thought about what it meant that the most powerful alpha on the continent had walked into this compound 4 days ago and been stopped in his tracks by something that lived in her blood and in the mark on her collarbone, and perhaps in the patterns her body already knew without being taught. She thought about her father, who had never thought to wonder what she might be. What happens now? She asked. He held her gaze. I don't know yet, he said, and she believed him because it had the quality of something he did not often admit. But I'll tell you when I do. She nodded. She stepped out of the circle and walked back toward the building. He did not call after her. The scar was burning again, not painfully, urgently, like something pressing against the inside of a door, asking to be let out. She pressed her palm flat against it and felt it pulse against her hand and walked into the warmth of the building and let herself think, very carefully, about what it might mean to finally become the thing she had always been. The days after that moved differently, not slowly, not quickly, precisely the way something moves when every part of it is being paid attention to. She continued her routine. The others in the kitchen continued theirs. Owen continued to argue with Dev, and Nina continued to not look up from her bowl, and Agnes appeared 3 more evenings at the table's far end, and ate her dinner without explaining herself, and sometimes said things that lodged in Alara's chest and stayed there. One evening Agnes said, "A wolf that shifts late shifts true. The longer the wait, the deeper the roots." Another evening she said, "Your grandmother stood in a field in the Northern Territory, and every wolf within 2 miles sat down without knowing why." She thought it was funny. She had a very good sense of humor. Alara collected these fragments the way she had collected everything in her life, quietly, carefully, without letting anyone see how much they mattered. On the 7th day of Caius's 9-day stay, Cooper called her to a meeting. She had known it was coming. The 48-hour reclassification had changed her formal status, but it had not changed Cooper's interest in the question of what to do with her, which had been complicated now by the Alpha King's involvement. She went to the meeting with her back straight and her hands steady, and her face arranged in the pleasant neutrality she wore when she needed to be unreadable. Cooper was a large man, lean, with iron-gray hair, and the specific kind of eyes that assess before they engage. He sat across a wide desk from her and he spoke without preamble. "The Alpha King has taken an unusual interest in your case," he said. "Yes," she said. "I need to understand what has passed between you." She looked at him steadily. "We have spoken a few times, briefly. He asked me about the terms of the transfer agreement. I told him what I knew. He acted on that information within the channels available to him. The reclassification followed." She paused. "I don't believe there's anything unusual about that, Alpha Cooper. He operates through proper channels. He investigated an irregularity. He corrected it." Cooper studied her. "The Alpha King does not generally make personal visits to transferred residents," he said. "I haven't experienced how he usually behaves," she said. "I only know what I've seen here." A pause. Cooper was not stupid. She could see him working something out, the same something Owen had been working out and Agnes had been circling and she herself had been refusing to state out loud. "You have no wolf," he said. "I haven't shifted yet," she said. The same words she had said to Maggie. Careful, not defensive. Something moved across Cooper's face. Not doubt. Exactly. Recalibration. He looked at the desk, at a point somewhere between his hands, and then back at her. "The Alpha King has requested that you be given full compound access and treated as a temporary guest resident rather than a transfer case," he said. "He has also requested that no decisions be made regarding your permanent status until the end of his current visit." Alara said nothing. "I'm granting that request," Cooper said. It cost him something, she could see that. Not pain, but the particular friction of doing something because you are required to rather than because you choose to. While he is here, you are a guest. When he leaves, we'll determine the longer-term arrangement. "Thank you, Alpha Cooper," she said. She walked out of that office and went directly to the east yard, and stood at the low stone wall, and breathed cold air for a full 5 minutes before she could trust her hands to be still. Guest. Not transfer, not peace exchange, not the Ashwood girl. Guest. The difference was smaller than freedom and larger than she had expected to feel. She thought about the fact that Caius Dren had done this quietly, without telling her it was coming, without making it a transaction between them. He had simply made it happen, and she had found out from Cooper's mouth. She thought about a man who did things because they should be done and not because he expected to be thanked for them. She pressed her fingers to her collarbone. The warmth was constant now, not pulsing, not spiking, just there, the way warmth is there in a room that has been heated carefully over time and has finally reached a temperature that holds. On the 8th evening, Caius came to the kitchen. She was there with the usual group, Owen and Maggie and Dev and Nina and Glenn, and tonight, additionally, Agnes. And they were halfway through dinner when the door opened and he stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and the particular quality of someone who has gone somewhere instinctively and is now making sense of the fact that they did. The table went completely silent. He looked at Alara, not for long. Briefly, accurately, the same way he did everything. "There's a secondary record in the archive pack I brought with me," he said, "the one you asked about. I thought you might want to see it tonight." She understood immediately, which was interesting, that she understood before she had processed it, as if a part of her was simply faster now than it had been before. "Yes," she said. She pushed back her chair. She looked at the table, at the faces arranged around the complete and absolute silence. "Good night," she said. "Good night," Owen said, with the expression of a man trying very hard not to have any expression at all. She followed Caius out of the kitchen. He took her to a room she hadn't been in, a small room off the main corridor that had been set up as a working space, with a table and 2 chairs and a lamp, and a leather bag from which he pulled a folder of documents with the practiced ease of someone who works from documents the way other people work from memory. He set the folder on the table between them and opened it. The pages inside were old photocopies of older originals, the kind of records that live in pack archives and are never officially cited, but never discarded. He pointed to a page near the middle. She read it. It took her a full 3 minutes. She read it twice. It was a record of the Voss bloodline on her father's side, going back 6 generations. At the 3rd generation back, a name, Vera Oates, who became Vera Voss upon mating. Beside her name, in a different ink, someone had written, "Confirmed Luna marker, Northern origin, scar present at birth." Her eyes moved down the page. The marker, according to the notes, had not manifested in her father. It had been considered dormant in his generation. But bloodline notes from the original Northern pack recorded that the marker could skip 1 generation and reassert in the next, her generation. She looked up. Caius was watching her. "I'm not dormant," she said. The word tasted different now. Not an absence, a compression, something pressurized rather than empty. "No," he said. "The scar." She touched her collarbone. His eyes followed the movement. "The mark in the records is described the same way," he said. "Left collarbone. Present from early childhood, warm to the touch." She looked at him directly. "You knew before you came here that there was someone matching this description in the region." "I knew the marker was active," he said. "My archivists track certain bloodlines for historical record. When the marker activates, it appears in the records, not immediately, not clearly, but there are signs that a trained archivist can see." He paused. "I didn't know you were here, in this compound, until I arrived. I didn't know who you were until I walked in and—" He stopped. She waited. He was not a man who stopped mid-sentence easily. "The bond recognition," she said quietly. He met her eyes. "Yes." The words sat between them like the first sentence of a very long conversation. She looked down at the document again, at Vera's name and the notation beside it. She thought about a woman she had never known, standing in a northern field while wolves sat down around her without knowing why, thinking it was funny. She thought about a father who had handed that bloodline away without knowing or caring or bothering to find out. She thought about the warmth in her collarbone that had been there since she was 8 years old, since before she could have known to look for it, pulsing patiently in the dark of her skin like a pilot light. She thought about Caius Dren, who had crossed 7 hours of territory and walked into a library and looked at a girl on the floor with a cold cup of tea, and known. She folded her hands on the table. "What does the bond mean?" she asked, "in terms of what happens next?" He was quiet for a moment. "It isn't a claim," he said carefully. "Not unless both people choose it. It's a recognition, a biological certainty that the other person exists in the world and is connected to you." He held her gaze. "What happens next is your choice." Entirely. She looked at him for a long moment, at the even dark eyes and the jaw and the hands resting on the table, and the quality of him that Owen had tried to describe and that she now understood from the inside. There is no space near him where you forget who he is. She understood it because he did not fill space with performance. He simply occupied it. He was simply, precisely, completely himself. And that was enough to make the air around him different. "I need time," she said. "You have it," he said, without hesitation, without negotiation. She nodded. She looked at the document one more time. "Can I keep a copy of this?" He pulled a second sheet from the folder. He had already made one. He slid it across the table. She looked at him. "You assumed I'd want it," she said. "I assumed you have the right to it," he said. She took the copy and folded it, and put it in her jacket beside the reclassification document, against her ribs where she could feel the paper when she breathed. She said goodnight. She walked back to the east wing. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay in the dark with her hand on her collarbone and the scar warm beneath her palm, and thought about choices and rights, and a grandmother she had never known, who had stood in a field and made wolves sit down with the simple fact of what she was. She thought about what it might mean to be that, not to perform it, not to carry it for someone else's benefit, to simply be it, the way Vera had apparently simply been it. She breathed slowly in the dark. Outside, the pines exhaled. She was here. She was connected. She was something the world had not yet finished explaining to her. She thought, very briefly and very carefully, that she might be ready to let it. On the last morning of Kyastren's visit, Alara woke before the pines had stopped making their night sounds. 4 in the morning. 5. The dark was complete and the east wing was cold, and she lay in it for a while doing what she had always done in important hours, listening. She listened to the compound, to the faint sound of Ironmore breathing around her, to the wind, to her own heartbeat, which was calm and even, and had been calm and even through everything, which was one of those quiet facts about herself she had long since accepted as a fundamental characteristic. She was not a person who came undone. She did not know if this was strength or a kind of damage sustained so early it had become structure. Some days she suspected both. The scar was warm. It had been warm since his arrival, with different intensities at different hours, and she had stopped making note of it as unusual and started treating it as information, a secondary sense she had not known she had until recently, like suddenly becoming aware that you have been tasting things you previously only swallowed. He was leaving today. She turned this thought over without urgency. He had 9 days scheduled, and today was the 9th. He had a convoy and advisors and 3 more territorial disputes waiting in other regions, and none of those things would pause for the question of what happened next between a descended Luna and the Alpha King who carried the only key to her recognition. She got up, she dressed, she pulled the 2 documents from her jacket pocket and read them in the early dark with the lamp on her bedside table, and then put them back. She went to the training circle. She had been going every morning since the first time. The regular group arrived at 7 and she was always gone by then. She had not told anyone. She suspected Owen knew. Owen seemed to know most things, but he had not mentioned it and she had not offered. She stood in the center of the circle and breathed the cold air and let her body remember what it knew. The movements were becoming more coherent, less the impression of a pattern and more the pattern itself, the way a melody emerges from scattered notes when you play them enough times in order. She could feel where each sequence was supposed to go, could feel the logic of it, the way this foot position made this redirect possible, the way this angle of the shoulder changed everything about what happened next. She did not know why she knew this. She was increasingly convinced the answer was somewhere in the bloodline document, in the same territory as Vera standing in a field and making wolves sit down without trying. Power that lives in the body rather than the mind. Power that doesn't announce itself, that simply is, that waits. She was in the middle of the 3rd sequence when she heard him. She kept moving. She did not look. She came to the end of the sequence and stopped and stood with her breath clouding the cold morning air. And then she turned. He was at the circle's edge, not in his traveling coat, not yet, training clothes, like that other morning. He had been up before her, or had not slept. There were people who did not sleep much before necessary departures, people whose minds moved faster than rest could keep up with. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen before. She had catalogued several of his expressions by now. The neutral assessment, the careful precision, the brief warmth he kept close to his chest, and the quality Owen had described as he's very much himself. This was something else. This was a man looking at something that mattered more than he had expected it to and trying to decide what to do with the weight of that. "You've progressed fast," he said. The patterns are already there, she said. I'm just finding them. He stepped into the circle. Not toward her, beside her, facing the same direction she had been facing. He moved into the first position of the sequence and held it, and then he moved through it, and she watched the difference. His version was the full version. The mastered thing. The lines of it were economical and absolute. He came to the end and looked at her. Try the third sequence again. She tried it. Halfway through, he said quietly, your left shoulder drops when you pivot. It changes your center. Here. He did not touch her. He adjusted his own shoulder to show her the difference. She corrected it and felt the change immediately. How the redirect opened up, became genuine rather than approximate. They worked through it 3 times. Then he showed her the 4th sequence, which she had not found yet, the one that came after the 3rd in the original teaching. She tried it twice and got the shape of it on the 2nd attempt. He watched her with the expression she was still learning to name. You'll be able to run it fully within a few weeks, he said, once you have all 12 sequences. I'll have to learn them on my own, she said. You're leaving today. Yes. He stood still at the edge of the circle. I've arranged ongoing documentation access for you through Ironmore's archive system, the bloodline records and the notes on the Luna marker. You'll have the full file. She looked at him. When did you arrange that? Yesterday. She had not known. He had done it without making it a thing between them. She thought again about what it meant to do something because it should be done, and not because you needed to be seen doing it. Alara. He said her name with the specific care of someone who has decided to use it deliberately. I need to say something before I leave. All right, she said. The bond between us is real. You feel it. I feel it. It will not become less real because I'm in a different territory. It will remain exactly what it is, which is... He stopped. Found the word. Certain. It's certain. What we do with it is not certain, and that is how it should be. You have been given very few choices in your life, and I am not going to add to that by making this one for you. She looked at him. Really looked, with all the attention she had spent her whole life being refused permission to use. The straight, honest face, the careful eyes, the man who made copies of documents before he was asked and arranged archive access quietly, and called her by name with deliberate intention. Do you want me to make a choice now? She asked. No, he said. I want you to have time, real time, not politeness time. He looked at the pine trees. I'll be in the northern region for the next 3 weeks, then back through this corridor on my way south. I'll stop here. He looked at her. If you want to talk, then we'll talk. And if I don't, then I'll stay 2 hours and handle the border follow-up and leave. No pressure, no performance, just the flat truth of what he would do. She felt something unknot in her chest that she had not known was knotted. All right, she said. They stood in the training circle for another minute in the early cold, not speaking, not needing to. The sky above the pine trees was beginning to go from black to the deep blue that preceded gray. Somewhere in the compound, the first early shift members were moving. He left the circle. She stayed. She heard his footsteps cross the yard and did not watch him go, because she thought that watching him go would take more than she was ready to give right now. She turned and moved through the 4th sequence again, alone in the blue dark circle, and felt the patterns settle into her, and knew that whether or not she was ready for what was coming, it was already underway. Owen found her after breakfast. He sat across from her in the small library and said nothing for a moment, which was his way of indicating that what he was about to say had been thought about. He's leaving in an hour, he said. I know, she said. He met with Cooper this morning for 40 minutes. I don't know what they talked about, but Cooper looked like a man who has been reminded of things he'd rather not think about. He paused. He also spoke to Agnes. Alara looked up from the book she was not reading. What did he say to Agnes? I don't know. Agnes doesn't repeat conversations. He looked at her carefully. Are you all right? She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. Yes, she said finally. I think I am. That's... He appeared to be choosing his words. That's good. That's really good, actually. I'm glad. He nodded at the book. What are you reading? Military history, she said. Owen stared at her. Is that? No, she said. It's actually military history. I needed something that required concentration. Right. He stood up. There's a council visit from the Northern Pack next week. Cooper will want to present a stable compound. That means I should be visible and uncomplicated, she said. You've never been complicated, Owen said. You've just been in a complicated situation. She looked at him, this young man with his honest face who had given her oatmeal on the first day and called her Alara before anyone else had thought to. She felt, for him, the clean, warm feeling of genuine gratitude that doesn't need to say much. Thank you, Owen, she said. He left. She sat with the military history book and listened to the compound move around her, and, at some point in the middle of the morning, heard the low sound of vehicles starting, and did not go to the window. The warmth in her scar moved differently when he was gone, still there, still steady, but the direction of it changed. It had been like a fire in the room, and now it was like the memory of a fire, still warm but reaching towards something that was no longer immediately present. She pressed her fingers to it and felt the gentle, persistent warmth of it and thought, for the first time, that she understood the mechanism, the bond, a connection in the blood that was geographical as well as emotional, a second heartbeat that lived outside her body. She took her hand away and picked up her book. He would come back in 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to figure out what she wanted. She opened to the military history, which was genuinely dense and required concentration, and that was exactly what she needed. The Northern Council visit arrived the following Tuesday. 4 officials from the Northern Pac, 2 mediators from a neutral third territory, and a collection of documentation that occupied 2 of Cooper's advisors for 6 hours. Alara stayed out of all of it, which was easy because no one thought to include her in any of it, and she used the time to continue working through the archive files Caius had arranged. The full Luna marker documentation was detailed in a way that made her feel, simultaneously, more grounded and more uncertain. Grounded because it provided structure for things she had only felt. Uncertain because the implications of the marker, laid out in archival language, were larger than she had expected. The Luna line, in the original Northern Pac tradition, was not a ceremonial designation. It was a functional one. The women who carried it historically served as anchors for Pac stability, not through authority in the political sense but through something older, a quality of presence that affected Pac dynamics. Wolves in proximity to an active Luna marker behaved with measurably greater cooperation, lower aggression, and stronger collective instinct. The effect was described in the archives with the specific scientific detachment of people who had observed something they could not quite explain but had also stopped trying to explain and simply documented. Alara read a particular passage 3 times. The marker remains dormant until it meets its recognized counterpart. In all recorded cases, the counterpart has been the dominant alpha of the primary territory in which the bearer resides or enters. The recognition is bilateral and immediate. Physical proximity is the primary trigger. She sat very still with the document in her lap. She thought about a corridor window and a library, and a training circle in the cold blue dark before dawn. She thought about a man who had walked into a building and known. She thought about herself, about what it felt like, from the inside, to be in his presence. Not swept away, not undone, nothing dramatic. Just more real, more located. As if something that had been slightly out of focus her whole life had quietly resolved itself into clarity. The dominant alpha of the primary territory. But she had not been in his territory when they met. She had been in Ironmore. She read the rest of the passage. The territory clause, she found after another page, referred to the territory acknowledged by the Alpha King's sovereign oversight, which included all 4 regions, which included Ironmore, which included therefore every inch of this compound and the East Yard and the training circle and the small library where she was sitting right now. She had been in his territory, technically, since birth. She had just not known where his territory ended. She put the document down and looked at the ceiling. "Vera," she said quietly, to no one, to a woman she had never met, "you could have left better notes." She imagined, very briefly, a woman with a good sense of humor standing in a northern field while wolves sat down around her. The woman was probably laughing. Alara felt the edge of a smile at the corner of her own mouth. It was a strange and specific comfort, this imagined great-grandmother. This woman who had carried the same mark and known what it was, and walked through the world with it without letting it define her ceiling. She picked the document back up and kept reading. The following days had a different quality to them. Not easier exactly. Clearer. She moved through the compound with the feeling of knowing more precisely what she stood on. She helped Dev with the supply schedule, which was a shambles, and in getting it sorted she had 3 separate conversations with Pac members she had not spoken to before, and found each of them interesting in specific ways. She discovered that Nina, who had not looked up from her bowl in 2 weeks of shared breakfasts, was in fact a trained herbalist with opinions about medicinal plants that were articulate, extensive, and completely without filter once she felt like sharing them. She trained every morning in the circle, sometimes alone. Sometimes she let the regular group see her, and once, on a Thursday morning, one of the women from the regular group, a tall woman named Bex who moved like someone who had been training since childhood, came over and asked to go through a sequence with her. They worked through it twice. Bex said, "You've got good instinct," and Alara said, "Thank you." And they both went back to their separate work. And it was a small thing that felt, to Alara, like more than a small thing. She thought about what it meant to be seen in your capability, rather than your limitation. She was learning this place, learning it the way she had learned everything that mattered. Quietly, thoroughly, without anyone noticing until it was already done. On the 11th day after Caius left, she received a letter. Not electronic, physical, sealed with wax and addressed in the same practical handwriting she had noted on the reclassification document. Hilda delivered it to her room with the expression of a woman who has opinions about wax-sealed letters, but is keeping them to herself. She sat on her bed and looked at the envelope for a moment before she opened it. It was one page. He wrote the way he spoke. Direct, economical. No word used that was not doing specific work. He wrote that the Northern dispute had resolved more cleanly than expected. He wrote that his archivists had found an additional record she should see, older than the file he had left her, from a Northern pack that had been absorbed into the Eastern Territory 60 years ago. He wrote that he would bring it when he returned. He wrote, at the bottom of the page, a single sentence that was not about documents or archives or territorial disputes. She read it twice. I think about the training circle in the early mornings, and about the fact that you were there before I was. She folded the letter and put it with the documents against her ribs. She went to dinner. She ate with Owen and the others. She did not say anything about the letter, and she did not need to. And no one asked. The warmth in her scar was vivid and steady. Outside the kitchen window, the pines moved in the dark, exhaling. 9 more days. She breathed slowly and ate her dinner and let herself want things, which was something she had spent most of her life not doing because wanting was how you located the places you were most vulnerable, and she had been too vulnerable for too long to afford the additional exposure. But she was not the same person she had been 5 weeks ago. She had not transformed. She had not needed to transform. She had simply been given enough space and enough time, and enough information to become more fully what she already was. She thought of Vera in the field, of wolves sitting down without knowing why, of a great-grandmother who thought it was funny. She thought it might be a little funny too, actually. The whole thing, the van with the cold chain, the kitchen table, the training circle, the library and the military history book that was actually military history. The man who made copies of documents before you asked and came back to a training circle in the blue dark morning to show you the 4th sequence. The improbability of it, the strange, specific, unlikely precision of how she had ended up here. Not because of what was done to her, despite it. She was here despite everything that had tried to make her small. She was here, and she was warm, and she was learning what she was, and in 9 days she would have a conversation that would matter. She put her fork down and looked at Owen across the table, who was telling some story about the supply truck, and she felt the kitchen, and the warmth and the sound of people who had learned her name, and the weight of the documents against her ribs, and she let herself be grateful. Not for what had been taken from her, for what she had built in spite of it. She picked her fork back up and kept eating, and the pines moved outside, and the scar was warm, and 9 days was not very long at all. He came back in 10 days, not 9. The extra day was not explained in any message. She heard from Owen that the Northern Regional handover had required an additional session, which was standard procedure when 3 packs were involved in overlapping claims, and which had apparently required the Alpha King to make a final decision at 10 in the morning and then drive through the night to be here by the time she was in the training circle. She did not know that last part until later. What she knew was that on the 10th day, before 6 in the morning, she was in the circle working through the sequence Bex had helped her with, and she felt the scar go from steady warm to vivid, unmistakable heat, and she turned without deciding to. He was at the circle's edge. He had not changed from traveling clothes. He was tired, not visibly, not in a way that most people would see, but she was learning to read the small things about him, the line of his jaw when he was carrying weight, the quality of stillness that was rest rather than calm. She did not say anything. She finished the sequence, came to the end, let her breath settle. You got the extra sequence, he said. Bex showed me. Good. He looked at her. I have the document. It can wait until you've slept, she said. A pause. He looked faintly surprised by this. She wondered how often people told him when to rest. It can wait, she agreed. Go to sleep. The document will still be there. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had spent 3 weeks thinking about and still did not have adequate language for. Not just the door opening, the door staying open, the deliberate choice to leave it that way. 2 hours, he said. Fine, she said. He walked back toward the main building. She turned back to the circle and moved through the sequence again, and the warmth in her collarbone moved with her like a second voice. She went to breakfast. She had oatmeal and coffee. Dev had actually fixed the supply schedule problem, which everyone celebrated at an appropriate level. Nina looked up from her bowl twice, which was unprecedented, and said 4 words that made Owen choke on his toast. Ilara felt the texture of this ordinary morning around her, and was glad to be inside it. 2 hours and 20 minutes after he had appeared at the training circle, Caius came to the library. She was there. She was usually there in the morning after breakfast, with whatever she was reading, and she had not consciously arranged herself to be easy to find. But she also had not arranged herself to be difficult to find, and the distinction was something she filed for later examination. He sat in the room's single chair. She was on the floor with her book and her fresh cup of tea. He pulled a folder from the inner pocket of his coat and held it for a moment before he put it on the floor between them. "This is from a pack called Orin," he said. "They were absorbed into the Eastern Territory in 1962. They kept records going back 300 years, and the archivists who absorbed their documentation catalogued it 15 years ago when the Eastern Archive was digitized." He opened the folder. "This is the earliest record of the Luna marker we have." She looked at the document. It was a reproduction. The original would be far too delicate to transport, but reproduced clearly, the handwriting small and precise and very old. She read it slowly. He waited without impatience. The Orin record described the Luna marker in terms she had not seen before. Not as a dormant genetic trait. As an active element of pack ecology, the word the original writer used was balance. The bearer of the mark was described as a balancing element within the larger pack system, not a leader in the authority sense, not a healer, a stabilizer, the wolf whose presence reduced conflict, increased coherent decision-making, and, the word the ancient writer used here made Ilara go still, recognized the alpha's true alignment. She looked up. "Recognized the alpha's true alignment," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "What does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment, careful. The Orin tradition held that an alpha's bond with his territory was not purely political. It was ecological. Pack stability, land health, the integrity of the territory itself, all of it, was bound to the alpha's alignment with something older than rank, something they called true north. He paused. The Luna bearer was the one who could feel when that alignment was genuine, and when it wasn't. She sat with this for a moment. And the bond between the Luna and the Alpha was how both of them confirmed the alignment was real, he said. He said it carefully, as if he had been thinking about how to say it for 10 days. It couldn't be faked. The bond only forms when both things are genuine. The Luna's bloodline and the Alpha's true alignment. If either is absent, there's no recognition. She looked at the document. At the small, precise handwriting of someone who had lived 300 years ago and had understood something she was only beginning to put language to. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "For 10 days, he said, which was honest and unnecessary and therefore meaningful. She put the document down. She looked at him directly, the way she had been practicing for weeks, looking at things she wanted to look at rather than looking away from them, which had been her survival strategy for so long it had become habit. "Tell me about your alignment," she said. "Tell me what you're actually trying to do with the 4 territories." He looked slightly surprised again, the good kind of surprised. The kind that comes from being asked the real question instead of the polite one. He talked for 20 minutes, not at length, not in the way of someone who enjoys the sound of their own authority, but with the specific precision of someone who had thought about something for a long time and had a clear picture of it. He talked about the 4 territories and what he believed they could become if the pack hierarchies stopped competing in ways that destabilized the land and the communities that lived in them. He talked about the way lower-ranked pack members were systematically underprotected by current law, and what specific changes he was building toward. He talked about the border disputes not as territorial victories but as negotiation failures, and what failure prevention looked like in practical terms. She listened the way she listened to everything, with her whole body, without interrupting. When he stopped, she said, "You've already made the changes in your own territory. Where I had direct authority, yes. And you're building coalition to expand them. Slowly. The northern visit last week." "Yes." She nodded. "You're doing it right," she said. "Slowly is right. The packs that feel coerced will resist. The ones that choose it will hold it." She paused. "My father made me into a peace treaty because he was trying to resolve a border dispute by force of convenience. It didn't work. It never works." He was looking at her with full attention. "Your father's approach is exactly the kind of thing I'm trying to change." "I know," she said. She picked up her tea. It was warm. She had made it recently. She thought about the distance between where she had started and where she was right now, sitting on a library floor reading 300-year-old documents about her own blood, talking to a man who held the largest territory in the region and was using it to try to build something worth holding. "I want to see the rest of the archive," she said. "Everything you have on the Luna line. I want to understand the full scope of it. I'll have it sent within the week," he said. "And I want to talk to Agnes again, properly, not just at dinner." "All right?" And she stopped. She was going to say, "And I want time." But she had said that once and he had given it to her without question. She did not need to say it again. She changed course. "And I want to know what the bond means practically, day to day, not symbolically. What does it change?" He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him sorting through his own experience of it, which had been going on for 10 days longer than hers. "It's directional," he said finally. "A constant awareness of where the other person is. Not specific, not thought level. More like knowing which way north is. You don't think about it, you just know." He paused. "And the other person's state affects you. Not overwhelmingly. Not losing yourself. But if you're in distress, I'll feel the shift. If I'm exhausted, I'll know you've driven through the night," she said. He met her eyes. Yes. She thought about the warmth in her collarbone changing quality when he arrived at the gate this morning. The way it had moved from memory of fire to fire in the room without any transition. She had not put that together consciously until now. "How do the people you work with manage it?" she asked, knowing the bond exists, in terms of professional dynamics. He looked at her. "That's a very practical question. I'm a practical person," she said. He considered. "The bond is acknowledged in pack tradition as distinct from authority. It doesn't grant the Luna bearer rank by proximity. It doesn't create obligation in either direction. It's a recognition, not a merger." He held her gaze. "You would remain yourself. Your choices remain your own. Your development, your territory relationships, your role in whatever you build, none of it becomes mine simply because the bond exists." She absorbed this. She thought about the word merger and how instinctively she recoiled from it. How much of her life had been other people deciding that her autonomy was transferable. "All right," she said. "All right," he said carefully. Meaning I'm satisfied with that answer," she said. "Not meaning anything beyond that. Yet." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The shape of one. She had not seen that before and filed it with the other small things she was collecting. She handed him the older document. "The copy stays with me," she said. "Of course," he said. He was at Ironmore for 3 days. Not 9 this time, not the extended stay of the first visit. 3 days of work and 2 mornings in the training circle, where they moved through sequences together in the early cold and said little, because words were not what that time needed. She learned the 5th sequence on the 2nd morning. The movements of it were less about redirect and more about stillness, about stopping force at its source rather than redirecting it. The mechanic was counterintuitive until it suddenly wasn't, until the body understood it, and then it was as obvious as breathing. On the evening of the 3rd day he was leaving again. She walked out with him to where the convoy was assembled. This had not been planned. She had been in the library and heard the vehicles being loaded and had simply put her book down and gone outside. He was standing near the lead vehicle with one of his senior advisors, going through something on a document. He finished it and signed it and looked up. She was standing at the edge of the yard in the early dark, hands in her jacket pockets. He walked over. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." He looked at her. The yard lights made the shadows sharp. He was leaving again and the scar would go from fire to memory of fire. And she would train alone in the circle and read documents and do supply schedules with Dev and have forward conversations with Nina. And 3 weeks or 4 weeks or however long it was would pass the same way as the last 10 days. Usefully, meaningfully, with the particular texture of a life being built rather than survived. "In the 3rd week," she said, "I want to go back to Ashwood." He went very still, not alarmed, alert. "Not to reconcile," she said, "to see my mother, and to retrieve my things." She paused, "and to be seen, by the people who decided I was disposable." He looked at her for a long time. She could see him sorting through multiple responses and discarding most of them. What he arrived at was, "Do you want company?" She thought about this seriously. "Not on the day," she said. "Before and after, yes." He nodded. "I'll arrange it so I can be in the region. You tell me when." "I will," she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. She could feel the directional quality of the bond, the pull that was not pressure, the orientation that was not compulsion. The knowledge of where someone was, steady and truthful. "Good night, Alara," he said. "Drive carefully," she said. The edge of that almost smile again. He turned and walked to the convoy. She stood in the yard until the vehicles had turned out of the gate and the sound of them had faded into the pine dark, and then she stood a moment longer, just feeling the change in the scar's warmth, from fire to memory, from immediate to distance, from present to held. She went inside. She went to the kitchen. Owen was still there, alone this time, doing something with a schedule on paper. He looked up. He looked at her face. He put his pen down. "All right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." He nodded. He handed her the kettle. She made tea. She sat across from him and they worked on the supply schedule together for an hour because it always needed doing, and the work was real and grounding and required attention, and this was exactly why she had come to find it. Afterward, in her room, she lay in the dark with the memory of fire warmth in her collarbone and thought about Ashwood, about her mother's dark door, about her sister's voices from inside the house, about her father's handwriting on a document that had sold her. She did not feel what she thought she would feel, thinking about going back. She had expected fear or rage, or the specific grief of returning to the place that had failed you. What she felt instead was something cooler and more deliberate, not anger, intention. She was going back because it was not finished, not for her father, who would have to manage the consequences of his choices through channels that now ran above him, not for her sisters, who would have to manage the sight of her returned, changed, claiming herself in a way they had never predicted. For her mother, for the woman who had been silent behind a dark door, who had known and not acted and who was, despite everything, the only parent Alara had ever found herself defending without being asked. And for herself, to be seen by the place that had looked through her, to stand in the yard she had left in chains and be something that could not be given away again. She breathed slowly in the dark. The pines exhaled outside. 3 weeks was not very long. She would be ready. She closed her eyes and let the warmth hold her and did not dream of anything dark. She did not go back to Ashwood in 3 weeks. She went in 2. Something changed in the second week that made waiting feel wrong. She could not name it precisely. It was not impatience. She had never been impatient. It was more like the feeling of a task that has been left undone for too long. Not urgent in the crisis sense, but urgent in the quiet sense. The way a letter you've been meaning to write sits on the desk and accumulates a subtle weight each day you don't send it. She told Owen on a Thursday morning. He absorbed the information with his characteristic brief silence and then said, "I'll drive you." She had not asked him to. "You don't have to do that," she said. 7 hours each way, he said. "You're not doing that alone." She looked at him. The honest face. She thought about what it meant that this was the person who had shown up for her. Not with drama, not with declaration, just consistently, practically, there. "Thank you, Owen," she said. She sent word to Caius that evening, not a request, an informing. He responded the next morning, 1 sentence. "I'll be in the Eastern Ridge region by Sunday." The number at the bottom of the page was a direct contact. She put it with the other documents. On Friday morning she was in the training circle before 5. The sky was not yet pretending to be anything but dark. She moved through all 5 sequences end to end for the first time, not practiced, not polished, but continuous. The thing in full. The patterns connected in the way they were supposed to, each one creating the conditions for the next, the whole being more functional than the sum of its parts. She could feel, doing it, something opening in her body that had been compressed, not her wolf, not yet, but something adjacent, something in the same family, power moving toward a surface it could not quite reach. And she came to the end and stood in the dark training circle breathing, and felt the warmth in her collarbone so intensely it was almost sound. Bex had arrived sometime in the last sequence. She was standing at the circle's edge with her arms folded. "You're ready for the 6th, Bex said. "Show me tomorrow," Alara said. "I need today." "For what?" Bex asked, not intrusively, just curious. "Going home," Alara said. Bex looked at her for a moment. "Good," she said. "You should." She turned and walked back to the main building. Alara stood alone in the circle, and the dark, and thought about the word home, which she had used instinctively, and which she now turned over in her mind carefully. It was not accurate. Ashwood had been where she lived. It had been the building, the cedar smell, the garden. It had not been home in the sense that required the people inside it to make it so. She was not going home. She was going back. The distinction mattered. She spent the day doing ordinary things. Supply schedule. Library. Dinner with the group, which was Nina's birthday apparently. Nina had not mentioned this, but Owen had found out from Glenn and procured a cake from somewhere, which appeared on the table after dinner and caused Nina to look up from her bowl for a full 30 seconds and say, in 3 words, that it was good, which Owen accepted as high praise, because from Nina it was. Elara slept better than she expected. Owen's truck left the Ironmore gate at 6 in the morning. Owen drove with the comfortable silence of someone who is good at companionable quiet, and Elara sat with her feet up on the dashboard in the way that she had discovered, over these weeks, was a freedom available to her in the cab of his truck specifically, and she watched the landscape shift as the 7 hours moved past them. She had the bloodline document with her, and the reclassification, and the older record from the Oran pack, which she had studied enough that she nearly had it memorized, but she brought it anyway for the specific physical reassurance of its presence. She was also aware, beneath everything, of the directional warmth of the bond, the way it told her where he was, not in words, not in any precise location, but the way you know which direction the sun is without looking. She knew he was to the east of her and moving. The Eastern Ridge region, he had said Sunday and she was going on Saturday, and he was moving to be closer. She had not asked him to do this. He had done it. She looked at the road and did not think about what she would say to her mother, or her father, or her sisters. She had found, over these weeks, that pre-scripting important conversations was a waste of energy. Real conversations didn't follow scripts. What mattered was knowing what you were there for, which she did. They crossed into Ashwood territory in the early afternoon. She felt it. Felt the pack boundary the way you feel the change in temperature stepping from one room into another. Her scar did something she had not expected. It pulled slightly, a directional shift, not painful but clear, like a compass needle adjusting. This place was in her blood differently than Ironmore. It was origin, not belonging, not anymore, but origin. The place her cells had first learned the world. Owen glanced at her. She shook her head slightly. She was all right. The Ashwood compound came into view at 3 in the afternoon. It was exactly as she had left it. Cedar gates, iron hinges. The particular smell of the territory that was part forest and part stone and part 100 years of pack life layered into the soil. It looked smaller than she remembered. Or perhaps she was just larger. Owen parked outside the gate and looked at her. "I'll be here," he said. "I know," she said. She got out of the truck. The gate guard was a man she recognized. Finn, one of the outer perimeter wolves, who had been at this post since she was a child. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "Elara Voss," he said. "Elara Voss," she agreed. "I'm here to see my mother and to retrieve my belongings. My status as a guest resident of Ironmore is documented." She did not say this defensively. She said it the way Owen had taught her to do things without knowing he was teaching her. Practically, simply, without excess. Finn looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he opened the gate. She walked through it. The compound was quiet in the middle of the afternoon. She saw 2 women she recognized from the market area of the territory, who both stopped and stared as she passed. She did not stop. She walked with her back straight and her hands in her pockets, and her face arranged in the neutrality she had always worn here. Not hostile, not soft. Present. Her mother's rooms were on the 2nd floor of the main house, the east corner. She climbed the stairs without seeing anyone else. Knocked once. A pause. Then the door opened. Her mother, small, careful-faced, with the eyes that Elara had inherited, and which Lena and Kara had not, looked at her. Her expression moved through 3 things very quickly. Shock, and then something complicated and grief-shaped, and then a kind of stillness that might have been either relief or a suspension of judgment. "Elara," she said, as if the word was something she had been keeping somewhere for a long time, and was now taking out carefully. "Hello, Mum," Elara said. She went inside. Her mother's room smelled the same, lavender and the faint pine resin that came in through the window, the same smell as the blue scarf from Grandmother Vera. Elara registered this without expressing it. She sat in the chair by the window that she had sat in as a child. Her mother sat across from her in the chair she always sat in. Between them, the table with the cold teapot. "I didn't know," her mother said, before Elara could speak. "You knew I was gone," Elara said. "Your door was dark." Her mother closed her eyes. "They told me 3 days before it happened. I didn't." She stopped. She opened her eyes. "I didn't know how to stop it." "You could have told me," Elara said. "You could have told me 3 days before, given me time." "I know," her mother said. Those 2 words, flat and absolutely honest, without defense. They sat in the air between them. Elara let them sit. She looked at her mother's hands on the table, small, Still, the hands she remembered from childhood when they were the safest thing in the world. Why didn't you? She asked. Her mother looked at the table. Because I was afraid that if I told you, you would run, and if you ran, your father would. She stopped again, rebuilt the sentence. I was protecting what I could see. I was not protecting what I should have protected. Me, Alara said. You, her mother agreed. Another silence. Longer this time. The lavender and pine resin smell moved around them. Outside the window, the cedar trees were dark green in the afternoon light. I know about Grandmother Vera, Alara said. Her mother looked up. Her name, the bloodline, what I carry. She held her mother's gaze. Did you know? Her mother was very quiet. Then, I suspected. Your father knew. He told me when we mated that his mother had been unusual. That the elder packs had called it the Luna line. He said it hadn't passed to him. He didn't think. She stopped. We didn't think. You didn't look, Alara said. Not an accusation. A fact. No, her mother said. We didn't look. Alara breathed. She thought about what anger would accomplish here, and decided what it would accomplish was less than she had available in this room right now. She was not angry. And she was tired, in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has recently put it down, and is now assessing what her arms feel like without it. I came for my things, she said, and to tell you that I'm well, and that the Alpha King has formally established my status as a guest resident of Ironmore, with full territorial rights. She paused. And to ask you something. Her mother waited. Vera, do you know anything about her that isn't in the official records? Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and went to the small chest at the foot of her bed, and opened it and brought back a photograph. Old, slightly blurred at the edges. A woman standing in what looked like a northern landscape, birch trees and open sky. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking at something to the left of the frame with an expression that was, unmistakably, privately amused. Your father gave me this years ago, her mother said. He didn't know why he kept it. He said she was the only person in his family he had always felt completely at ease with, that she made rooms feel safer. She put the photograph on the table between them. He never connected that to the bloodline, or chose not to. Alara looked at the photograph. Vera, her great-grandmother, standing in the northern light, looking at something funny. She picked the photograph up. May I keep this? Her mother hesitated, then nodded. Alara put it in her jacket pocket. She stood. I'm going to get my things from my room, then I'm leaving. Her mother stood also. She looked at Alara with the grief-shaped, complicated expression that had been there since the door opened, and underneath it, something else, something like the beginning of a reckoning with herself. Are you safe? Her mother asked. Yes, Alara said. Are you? Her mother stopped, started differently. Are you more yourself? Alara looked at her. This small, careful woman who had not known how to protect her, and who had failed to try, and who was asking now, in the wrong order, the only question that actually mattered. More than I've ever been, Alara said. Her mother reached out and touched her arm, briefly, the lightest possible contact. Alara stood still and let it happen. Then she went to get her things. Her room was exactly as she had left it, which she had not expected. The bed, the desk, the window facing the cedar trees. She had thought they might have cleared it, repurposed it, erased her the way the family had always been most comfortable with her erased. Instead, it was intact, waiting with the particular patience of rooms that belong to people who have left. She packed her books and the blue scarf and the 2 photographs she cared about, and 3 pieces of clothing she wanted, and left everything else, because everything else was from before, and before was not where she was going. She was on her way down the stairs when she ran into Lena. Her eldest sister was at the bottom of the stairs, and the moment of seeing each other was mutual. Neither had expected the other here, at this exact corner, at this exact moment. Lena was still golden-looking, still precise, still carrying herself with the certainty of someone who has never questioned her place in a room. But she went pale, actually pale, color leaving the face all at once. Alara, she said. Lena, Alara said. Lena looked at the bag in her hand, at Alara's face, at the stillness of her, the uprightness of her. The specific quality that she was aware, even from the outside, was different from anything Lena had expected to see. You look well, Lena said. Her voice was careful, the voice of someone choosing words for an unfamiliar terrain. I am well, Alara said. She did not add anything. Lena's expression moved through several calculations. We didn't know it would be so sudden, she said. The agreement. We thought there would be more discussion. There was not, Alara said. Lena looked at her. Are you? I am well, Alara said again. I have everything I came for. I'll see myself out. She walked past her sister. Lena did not call after her. At the bottom of the main stairs, she crossed the ground floor without stopping, and went through the front door and down the gravel drive, and through the cedar gate, which Finn opened without comment, and back to Owen's truck. Owen took one look at her face and started the engine. They drove for an hour in silence. Then she said, "She kept my room." "Your mother?" Owen said. "Yes." He thought about this. "People keep rooms," he said carefully, "when they expect someone back." She looked at the road. The Ashwood territory fell away behind them, and she felt it as a physical thing. The lightning. The particular sensation of leaving a weight you have not fully known you were carrying until the moment it lessens. "She gave me a photograph," she said. She told him about Vera, about the field and the wolves sitting down, about the woman looking at something funny just outside the frame of the camera. Owen listened. He was good at listening. "She sounds like someone you'd have liked," he said. "I think so," Alara said. "I think I would have liked her very much." The road moved under them. The territory changed back toward familiar, back toward darker pines and colder air, and the particular quality of the north that she had come to recognize as, if not home, then something close to home. Something growing in that direction. Her scar was warm the whole way back. She did not know if that was the bond or the bloodline or simply herself. She was beginning to think those three things were not as separate as she had assumed. They arrived at Ironmore after dark. Owen pulled through the gate and stopped in the east yard, and she gathered her bag and got out. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." "Anytime," he said. He meant it, which was why it didn't need to be said more elaborately. She went inside. She put her bag in her room. She pulled out the photograph of Vera and propped it against the lamp on her bedside table, the woman in the northern light, looking at something funny just outside the frame. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her, and felt the distance she had traveled today, not in miles, in something harder to measure. She had gone back, she had stood in the place that had failed her, and she had not broken, had not hardened, had not needed to perform anything. She had simply been herself. New-shaped, better informed, no longer waiting. She looked at Vera's photograph. "I went back," she said quietly. The woman in the photograph went on looking at something funny just outside the frame. Alara felt, very carefully, the beginning of something that might eventually become peace, not with what had happened, with herself, with the fact of her own survival, and what it had made her, with the long, slow work of becoming. She put her hand on her collarbone. The warmth was steady as a kept promise. She changed into clean clothes. She went to the kitchen. She ate the reheated dinner that Maggie had left on the counter with a note that said simply, "Knew you'd be hungry." She sat at the long table alone and ate and looked at the kitchen and the familiar ordinary surfaces of the place she had been learning to live in. And she let herself feel something she had been building toward for weeks without naming it. She was not just surviving this, she was inhabiting it. That was different. That was everything. She put her bowl in the sink. She turned off the light. She walked back to her room past the stone corridor and the smell of pine that came in through the ventilation gaps and the distant sound of the night watch doing their rounds. She looked at Vera one more time. Then she slept, deeply, without interruption, for the first time in longer than she could remember. He came back on a Sunday. She was not in the training circle when he arrived. She was in the kitchen, helping Dev reorganize the supply storage because it had defeated all previous organizational attempts and she had decided to approach it differently. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee, and there was flour on her sleeve from where she had moved a baking shelf that turned out to be unstable. She knew he had arrived before she saw anyone or heard anything. The scar told her. The directional pull shifted from distant east to here, immediate, present in the room the way a fire is present when you walk into a room that has one. She finished what she was doing. She wiped the flour off her sleeve. She poured herself a cup of coffee and went to find him. He was in the main corridor, coming out of Cooper's administrative section, with the folder of Northern documents under his arm, and the look of a man who had been in a vehicle for many hours, and was still functioning through the momentum of it. He saw her. The momentum in him settled. "You went to Ashwood," he said. "A week ago," she said. "I sent word." "I know. I was already on the way when I got it." He looked at her face with the full attention that she had, by now, learned to stand inside without looking away from. "How was it?" "Useful," she said. "Hard. Finished." He nodded. That was enough for him. Not because he was disinterested, but because he understood that some things came in the right size and did not need to be expanded. "My father is going to hear about the formal documentation," she said. The reclassification. My status under the king's oversight. He'll work out the implications. He already has, Caius said. I received a formal inquiry from Ashwood Pack leadership 3 days ago regarding the terms of the original exchange agreement and whether it remains legally operative. She looked at him steadily. And? It doesn't, he said. It never met the legal standard for a cross-pack transfer agreement because it lacked your documented consent. I've sent the formal response through the regional council. She absorbed this. Her father receiving formal notification from the Alpha King's administrative office that the transfer of his third daughter had been an unlawful act. The bureaucratic weight of it. The quiet, unstoppable force of paperwork moving through channels above him. He won't like that, she said. No, Caius agreed. He won't. She thought about her father's face, about the handwriting on the agreement, about the 4 seconds of hesitation she had always imagined before he wrote her name. Good, she said. He looked at her, not with satisfaction or vindication. He was not performing either of those things, just watching her process it, giving her the space of the processing. Come, he said. I have something from the archive. They went to the small working room, the same one as before, with the table and 2 chairs and the lamp. He opened the folder. This time, instead of pulling a document, he pulled a map. It was old, not as old as the Orin record, but old enough that the paper had the faint brown tinge of age, and the edges were slightly feathered. It showed 4 territories in their historical configuration, before the boundary adjustments of 60 years ago, before the northern pack absorptions. At the center of the map, where all 4 territories intersected, someone had marked a location in dark ink, a small symbol she did not immediately recognize. She leaned over to look at it more closely. What's the mark? The Orin archive used it to indicate a place of high pack convergence, he said, where the territory boundaries naturally pooled, where decisions about the wider region were historically made. He traced the point on the map with 1 finger. It's in the northern ridge, about 30 miles from here. She looked at the intersection point, at the symbol. The Luna tradition. Was it tied to a specific place? Not exclusively, but there are records of the original Northern Pack gatherings happening at exactly this location. The Luna bearer of that generation lived in the northern ridge. He paused. The site has been unused for about 60 years. It's technically within the boundary of the Eastern Territory now, which falls under my direct oversight. She sat back and looked at the map. Why are you showing me this? Because the new archive documentation suggests the site still functions, in the ecological sense. He looked at her carefully. There have been 3 incidents in the past decade of pack wolves, from different territories, spontaneously converging on that location without instruction. Each time, the wolves involved reported a reduction in territorial aggression for months afterward. The packs that sent them wrote it off as unusual weather or geographical proximity. But you think it's the site activating, she said. I think the site has always been active, he said. And I think it's been waiting for something the same way certain other things have been waiting. His eyes met hers. I think that if you went to that location, something would happen. I don't know what. She looked at the map. At the intersection point where the territories met. She thought about the training circle and the movements that lived in her body without being taught, and about Vera in the northern field, and about the warmth in her scar that had been building in intensity for weeks. You want to take me there, she said. I want to give you the option, he said. I'm not taking you anywhere. She looked at him. His hands were flat on the table beside the map, his posture that of someone who has put something down carefully and stepped back from it. She thought about how consistently and completely he did that, offered without claiming, presented without pushing. She had known so few people in her life who did not confuse the two. When? She asked. When you're ready, he said. Tomorrow morning, she said. He nodded. That simply, no surprise, no recalibration, just, all right, tomorrow morning. She folded her hands on the table and looked at the map and felt the particular clarity of a decision made from the right place, not from pressure or fear or the need to prove something, but from the simple recognition that the time was right, and she was not going to spend energy pretending otherwise. Can I keep the map? She asked. He slid it across the table to her. She studied it that evening, cross-referencing it with the bloodline documents, which she had now nearly memorized. The site on the map sat at the center of what the Orin records called the Convergence Territory, a place where the boundary-marking instincts of 4 different pack cultures effectively neutralized each other, producing a space that belonged equally to all of them, and therefore truly to none. Neutral ground in the oldest sense. She thought about what that meant for the Luna tradition. A bearer of balance, going to the place that had always been balanced, a key to a lock that had been waiting 60 years. She was awake early. earlier than usual. She was already dressed when the sky was still dark, and she went to the training circle and ran all 5 sequences from memory in the cold, and the warmth in her scar was so vivid that for a moment she put her hands on her knees and breathed and felt it pulse against her palm like something alive and coiled and ready. He was waiting for her at the east gate with a single vehicle, not the convoy. Just a vehicle and a driver who he dismissed before Alara reached the gate, which she noted and did not comment on. They drove north. She did not ask questions. She watched the land through the window and let the drive do what long drives did, settle her into a particular quality of readiness that was neither heightened nor dulled but level and clear. He drove. She had not expected him to drive himself. He drove well, the same way he did everything, without wasted motion, with a quiet competence that was not performance. After a while she asked, "Do you know what will happen at the site?" "No," he said. "Nothing in the records is specific about the mechanism." "The mechanism," she said. "You sound like an archivist." "I spent 2 weeks with my archivists preparing for this visit," he said. "Possibly some of it transferred." She looked at him sideways. He was watching the road. She could see, from this angle, the line of his jaw and the quality of his attention, and the slight tension in his shoulders that meant he was carrying something he had decided to carry quietly. "You're not certain this is safe," she said. "The records suggest it is," he said. "Records from 300 years ago suggest many things." She looked at the road. "But you came anyway. You said tomorrow morning," he said. She understood what he meant. Not, "I came because it is probably safe. I came because you were going, and I was not going to let you go alone, to an unknown quantity." She did not say this out loud. She looked at the landscape moving past them, the pines thinning into something older, birch and ash and the occasional rowan, the trees of the deeper north that did not grow in the same abundance further south. The light was still thin and pale, and the road was empty. The world at this hour had a particular quality of being held just before something happened. The site was not marked by any visible sign. They stopped at a pull-off on a narrow road, and he checked the coordinates and looked at the tree line and said, "It should be through here. About 1 kilometer." They walked into the trees. The forest floor was soft, decades of fallen leaves composted into something that gave slightly under each step. The trees were old. Not dramatically large, not ancient in the sense of redwoods or sequoias, but old in the way of trees that have been standing in one place for long enough that their presence has become a geographical feature. She could feel the quiet of them, different from the Ironmore pine quiet. This was deeper, more deliberate. She could also feel something else. It began as a vibration in her scar, not warmth now, something directional, a pull toward something ahead and slightly to the right that was neither physical nor entirely internal. She followed it without deciding to. He walked slightly behind her. She could feel him there, the bond's directional certainty, precise and steady, and she found herself glad of it in a way that was not about safety, about witness, about someone being there when things happened. They came to the clearing before she expected it. It was not large. Perhaps 40 feet across, roughly circular, open to the sky above. The trees at its edge were the oldest in the forest. She could see their age in the girth of them, in the way their root systems had surfaced and intertwined with one another at the clearing's boundary. In the center of the clearing, the ground was slightly different, darker, denser, as if the earth itself had been concentrating here for a very long time. She walked into the center. The effect was immediate. Not dramatic, not like the stories that people tell about moments of transformation, the lightning and the fire and the sudden overwhelming revelation. It was more like a door opening in a quiet room, like light flooding into a space that had been long in darkness, like breathing after a long time of not quite breathing enough. The scar on her collarbone went from warmth to heat to something beyond heat, not pain, not fire, but pressure, as if something that had been compressed for 22 years was finally being given room. She felt it move through her from the collarbone outward, down her spine, into her hands and feet, into the tips of her fingers, into the back of her throat. She stood very still in the center of the clearing and let it happen. Caius was at the clearing's edge. She could feel where he was without looking, the bond, steady as a compass, and she could feel, across the distance between them, that he was feeling something too. Not the same thing. Something adjacent, something responding to what was happening in her. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Not with fear, the way hands shake when a great tension releases. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed and felt the pressure in her collarbone resolve into something that had the quality of recognition, not the recognition of seeing something new, but the recognition of remembering something that has always been true. The wolf was there, not surfaced, not yet, but present. Awake, no longer a locked door. Present the way a river is present under ice. The way spring is present in January. Not here yet, but coming. Absolutely coming. Undeniable. She felt the shape of it in her, the way you feel the shape of a word before you say it. She did not shift. She stood in the center of the clearing with the winter-pale sky above her, and the old trees around her, and the shaking in her hands slowly steadying, and she breathed, and she held herself, and she was not afraid. She was not afraid. She turned and looked at him. He was at the clearing's edge where she had felt him, one hand against the trunk of the oldest tree, standing still, watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before, and which she had, at this point, the experience to read. It was the expression of a man who has been holding himself very carefully for a long time, and has just had that carefully maintained distance closed by something he did not arrange and cannot argue with. She walked toward him. He stayed where he was. She stopped a few feet away. "The wolf is there," she said. Her voice was steady. The shaking had stopped. "I know," he said. "I felt it." "Not yet," she said. "But soon." He nodded. She looked at him, at the careful face, the careful hands, the quality of him that she had been studying for weeks without quite admitting the nature of her attention. "Tell me one thing," she said, honestly. "Yes," he said. "If I were not the Luna bearer, if the bond did not exist, if you had walked into that compound and I had been exactly who I appeared to be, an unranked, unshifted girl from a mid-sized pack with no particular standing, would you have looked at me twice?" He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that is thinking honestly rather than building an answer. "I don't know," he said. "I'll tell you what I do know. The bond forms on recognition, but recognition is not fabrication. It didn't create something. It confirmed something." He looked at her directly. "I don't know who you would have been without the bloodline. You don't know either, so the question may not have an answer." She looked at him. She thought about this. "That's not a satisfying answer," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it's an honest one." She breathed the cold clearing air. She looked at the trees at the clearing's edge, the root systems intertwined at the boundary, holding together what would otherwise separate. She thought about the Orin archives and convergence territory and the way the oldest things were often the most honest, precisely because they had no investment in being anything other than what they were. "All right," she said. She walked back to the center of the clearing. She stood in it and looked up at the pale sky and felt the wolf in her, close to the surface now, and felt the warm scar on her collarbone, and felt the bond's compass-true awareness of where he stood, and she let all of it exist simultaneously without trying to sort it into a hierarchy of importance. The land under her feet was old. It had been holding this space for 60 years. She was here. The thing it had been holding the space for was here. She breathed into it and let it hold her, and stayed until the holding had done whatever it needed to do, and then she walked back to where he was standing and said, "I'm ready to go back." They walked out of the clearing together in the winter light, and the old trees exhaled around them, and she did not look back, because the clearing was not something she was leaving. It was something she was carrying forward. The drive back was different from the drive there. Not in what was said, not much was said, in the quality of the silence which had changed, the particular density of a silence between two people who are both holding the same weight of a thing that has just become real. She looked at the birch and ash moving past the windows, at the light changing as they moved south, pale gold becoming the gray that preceded evening. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about the 6th sequence that Bex was going to show her. She thought about the supply schedule and Nina and the long table in the kitchen and the photograph of Vera on her bedside table. She thought about a man who drove himself rather than sending a driver, and who had put his hand against an old tree at the edge of a clearing and held himself carefully and answered the most honest question she could ask with the most honest answer available. She did not know, yet, what the next thing was. She had 3 weeks of knowing and 2 visits and a morning in a clearing, and those things were real and significant, but they were not yet the whole shape of it. She knew this. She was also not afraid of not knowing yet, not anymore. She leaned her head back against the seat and let the road carry her home, and felt the scar warm and steady and patient, the same as always, the same as it had always been, waiting, not anxious. The pulse of something that knew it had time because the thing it was waiting for was already underway. Her wolf came on a Tuesday. Not in the training circle, not in the clearing, not in any ceremonial space or at any planned moment. She was in the library, reading, when the bond warmth in her collarbone went from steady pulse to a sudden sustained heat that was not quite fire and not quite sound, but something in the same family as both. And then something in her chest opened like a window thrown wide in summer, and the library went from familiar to vivid. The smell of it doubled, tripled, became specific in ways that had no language yet, and her hands, flat on the book pages, felt the texture of the paper with a completeness she had never experienced. She sat very still. The wolf did not shift her, not yet. It introduced itself. Like a presence in a room, you feel it before you see it, before you could describe it, before it requires anything of you. You just know it's there. She put her hands flat on the table and breathed the new vivid library smell, and waited. A minute, two. Then it settled, like a great animal lying down after a long journey, and she was herself again but with a new room in her that had not existed before. She picked up her book. She tried to read. She got through 2 sentences before she put it back down. She went to find Agnes. Agnes was in the herb garden at the back of the compound, which Alara had not known existed until this moment, because it was behind the supply building and not on any route she usually took. Agnes was there with her hands in the cold earth, moving methodically between the rows of dormant plants. Not dormant to her, apparently, because she was speaking quietly to them in the way of someone having a conversation with something that listens. She looked up when Alara came around the corner of the supply building. She looked at Alara's face. She sat back on her heels. "When?" she said. "About 20 minutes ago," Alara said. Agnes studied her for a long moment, with the careful eyes of someone assessing structural integrity. Then she nodded. "Sit down." There was a low stone wall at the edge of the herb garden. Alara sat on it. Agnes stayed where she was in the earth, which seemed right. Agnes had the quality of someone who is most themselves with their hands in something real. "What does it feel like?" Agnes asked. "Like a room I didn't know was there," Alara said. "I can feel it, but I haven't." "You haven't let it move you yet," Agnes said. "That's right. That's correct for your bloodline. It will not be a violent shift. It will be," she searched for the word, "collaborative. You and the wolf are partners, not two things fighting for the same body." "How do you know that?" "Because that's what the Luna line produces," Agnes said simply. "The records say it, and the records are right, because the records were written by people who watched it happen over generations." She brushed earth from her hands. "When will you try?" "I don't know," Alara said honestly. "I didn't plan the arrival. I assume I can't plan the first shift." "You can," Agnes said. "With your bloodline you can. The wolf will wait for you. It's been waiting 22 years. She looked at her steadily. "The question is when you're ready, not whether." Alara sat on the stone wall with her hands in her lap and felt the new room in her chest. The presence of the wolf, patient and large and deeply, completely her own, and thought about what ready meant, and discovered that she already knew. She went to the training circle. She told no one. She went in the afternoon, which was unusual. The circle was typically empty between noon and 5, and she had never used it at that time. She stood in the center of it and felt the packed earth under her feet, and the cold air, and the pines at the compound's edge. She closed her eyes. She breathed, slowly, in the way she had learned to breathe, fully, without reservation, as if air was something she had stopped rationing. She let the wolf move. It was not violent. Agnes had been right. It was collaborative, the most accurate word she would later find for it. The shift moved through her like water finding a new level, like a form completing itself. Not painful, not frightening, complete. She stood in the training circle as her wolf. She did not know how long she held it. The world was different from here, not frightening, not overwhelming, but vivid in the way the library had briefly been vivid, except fully, everywhere, the entire world resolved into a clarity she had no frame of reference for. The smell of the pines was not just pine anymore. It was specific. Each tree individual, each one carrying its own history in the scent. The ground under her paws was not just ground. It was alive in 10,000 ways she could suddenly perceive. She turned in the circle. Once, feeling her own body in it. Silver white, the wolf. She could see this only in the way you see something peripheral, catching the color of her own flank at the edge of her vision. The records had said Luna line wolves ran pale, sometimes white, sometimes silver. She had read this without attaching much to it. Now it was simply her. And the color was simply the color of the thing she was, and it was right. She shifted back. She stood in the circle in her own form, breathing hard, hands shaking again with the release of a different tension. She pressed her palms against her thighs and waited for the shaking to stop. When she looked up, Bex was at the circle's edge. Bex, who had shown her the 6th sequence. Bex, who had said you've got good instinct with the matter-of-fact appreciation of someone who cares about craft more than politics. Bex, who was standing at the circle's edge right now with an expression that was professional shock, and underneath it, something that was not quite awe, but was in the same neighborhood. Silver, Bex said. A statement, not a question. Yes, Alara said. Bex looked at her for a moment. Then she walked into the circle and held out her hand. Alara took it. They shook hands, which was an unusual gesture but felt like the right one, not the deference of rank, not the softness of comfort. The acknowledgement between two people who have both been paying serious attention to something and have now confirmed that what they were paying attention to was real. Does anyone else know? Bex asked. Agnes knew it was coming, Alara said. I haven't told anyone else. Bex nodded. You should tell the Alpha King first, she said. Alara looked at her. Why? Bex looked back with the direct practicality that was her most characteristic quality. Because the bond will have registered it on his end regardless. Anything that's significant in a fated mate's development, he already knows something happened. He just doesn't know what yet. A pause. Better to be the one who tells him than to let him find out through the residue. Alara had not thought about this. She thought about it now. The directional warmth of the bond, always present, always accurate. A shift, a first shift, after 22 years of dormancy, would not go unnoticed on the other end of that connection. When did he leave? Bex asked. Yesterday morning, Alara said. Then he felt it at about. Bex checked her watch. 3 hours ago, and has been sitting with the uncertainty since. She looked at Alara. He'll be very controlled about it. He's always very controlled. But it's not kind to leave someone controlled with an uncertainty they can't resolve. Alara looked at the circle. She thought about a man who drove himself rather than sending a driver, and who stood at the edge of a clearing with one hand against an old tree, and answered honest questions honestly. All right, she said. She went to her room and sent a message. Short. She had learned his communication preferences by now. No preamble, no softening. Direct, in the language of someone who expects to be understood. She wrote, I shifted today. First time. Silver. I'm well. She sent it and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at Vera's photograph and waited. The response came in 11 minutes. One sentence. I felt it, and I've been very carefully not panicking for the past 3 hours. She read it twice. She looked at it for a long time. Then she felt something move through her that was not quite laughter but was the first cousin of it. Warm and sudden and entirely genuine. She wrote back, You could have sent a message. His response, You could have sent a message first. She thought about this. Then she wrote, Fair point. He wrote, Are you actually well? She wrote, I am actually well. Better than well. A pause. Then, Good. I'll be there Thursday. She put the device down on the bedside table next to Vera's photograph. She looked at them side by side, the message and the photograph. The great-grandmother looking at something funny just out of frame, and the man who had been carefully not panicking. She felt the warm edge of something large and good and real. The wolf settled in her like a tide coming in, like something finally home. On Wednesday evening, Cooper summoned her. She had been expecting it. Bex had apparently said nothing, but the compound had its own information flows, and 3 pack members had been in proximity to the training circle during the afternoon, and one does not shift to a silver wolf in a training circle and have no witnesses. Cooper was in his office with 2 of his senior advisors and the specific expression of a man recalibrating several assumptions at once. She sat across from him without being asked to sit, which was the correct thing to do, and she knew it. You shifted, he said. Yes, she said. Silver. He said it with a quality that suggested the word had weight he had not expected to handle. Yes, she said. The Luna Line records, he said. He stopped. He looked at his advisors and then back at her. I've reviewed the historical documentation since the Alpha King's visit. I understand now what your status represents, beyond the transfer classification. She waited. You are not simply a guest resident of Ironmoor, he said. The Luna Bearer is recognized under the old pack covenants as a territory asset of the highest order. No single pack can claim exclusive rights to the bearer's presence or development. He looked at her steadily. I need to understand what your intentions are. I am not a territory asset, she said, and said it pleasantly, without aggression, because the pleasantness was genuine. She was not angry at Cooper. She simply needed to establish something. I am a person. The Luna marker is something I carry. It is not something you hold. Cooper looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not defeat. Something more honest. The The recognition of a man who has used administrative language when the person across from him is operating in a different register entirely. That is accurate, he said. Forgive the framing. She nodded. My intentions, she said, are to continue learning, to establish my own formal PAC status through the regional council processes, and to develop a role that serves the territory without being owed by it. She paused. I'll be consulting with the Alpha King on the formal structure. He has authority over the regional council process. I'm aware, Cooper said. He was quiet for a moment. Are you intending to remain at Ironmore? She considered this honestly. For now, she said. This is where my life is at the moment. Where it goes from here is not yet decided. He nodded. She could see him accepting this with the particular resignation of a man who has understood that the balance of a situation has shifted permanently, and that his options are to adjust gracefully, or to be left behind by events he cannot control. The compound is open to you, he said. All of it. Fully. Thank you, Alpha Cooper, she said. She left the office and went back to the East Wing and stood at her window and looked at the pines in the evening dark, and she felt, for the first time, that Ironmore was something she was choosing rather than something she had been placed in. The difference was everything. On Thursday morning she went to the training circle early. She was not alone. Bex was already there, and two others from the regular group, and they made space for her without comment, and she moved through the sequences with them in the cold, and it was different now. Not in the sequences themselves, in what was underneath them. The wolf aware and present, the geometry of the movements having a new layer of rightness, a new dimension of instinct that translated them from patterns she had found into patterns she inhabited. She was working through the sixth sequence for the fourth time when she felt the scar shift. Here. She kept moving. She did not look at the gate. She came to the end of the sequence and turned. He was at the compound gate, walking in. Not from the convoy's usual approach but alone, on foot, which meant he had left the vehicle somewhere outside and walked the last section. He was in his traveling coat and he had clearly not stopped. She walked across the yard to meet him at the halfway point. They stood in the open ground between the circle and the building. You're early, she said. It's Thursday, he said. It's 6 in the morning. That's still Thursday, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The directional bond was not a pull anymore. It was a resolution, like the moment a lens clicks into focus. Both of them present. Both of them here. You felt the shift, she said. Yes, he said. But you didn't send a message then. You sent yours first, he said. I waited for yours. She thought about this, about a man 3 hours away feeling something significant happen in someone he was bonded to, and choosing to wait for her to name it before he named anything himself. She breathed cold morning air. She looked at his face, the careful jaw, the direct eyes, the 3-hour drive under them probably, the controlled patience of someone who has been working very hard not to impose. Do you want to see? She asked. A pause. Yes, he said. She walked back to the training circle. He followed. Bex and the others stepped back to the edge without being asked. They read the room correctly, which was why they were here at this hour, and she had not resented their presence. She stood in the center of the circle. She shifted. Collaborative, Agnes had said. Partners. She stepped into the wolf the way you step into something that has always been waiting for you to arrive, and the world resolved into the doubled vivid clarity of it, and she turned to face him. He was at the circle's edge. He had gone very still in the way that she knew now, the still that was feeling something substantial and containing it with practiced care. His eyes on her were direct and clear, and she could feel, even across the distance, the shift in the bond's quality, the way recognition moved through it, not surprise but confirmation. She held the shift for a moment, let him look, let herself be seen. Then she stepped back. She was herself again, breathing, hands not shaking. She looked at him. He crossed the circle to her. He stopped an arm's length away. Still that distance, still that care. She thought, he will always keep this distance unless I change it. He will never push. She changed it. She stepped forward, not dramatically, one step, enough to close the careful distance he maintained. He looked at her with the expression that was the door open and staying open, and underneath it something that was not contained, that was past the edge of containable, that was simply him without the management. She put her hand on the center of his chest, felt his heartbeat through the coat, fast, controlled into something even, but fast underneath. She looked up at him. The wolf knows you, she said. She knew you before I told her to. He put his hand over hers on his chest, not gripping, just covering, warm. I know, he said. They stood in the training circle in the early Thursday morning, with the pines around them, and the sky going from dark to the thin gold of something beginning. And she felt the scar warm, and the wolf settled, and the bond present and clear and true. And she thought about Vera in the northern field, with the wolves sitting down around her, and the private amusement at the edge of her face. She understood it now, the amusement, the vast, specific, improbable, completely right improbability of it. She pressed her palm flat against his chest. He pressed his hand flat over hers. They stood there in the cold and the beginning light, and it was the quietest and most complete moment she had ever been inside. And she let it be that without adding anything to it, because it did not need anything added to it. It was already everything. The news moved faster than she expected. Not from the training circle. She had not thought about it, had not guarded against it, and it had moved anyway, the way things move in closed communities, sideways and fast, through a system of looks and pauses and carefully worded questions asked by people who already knew the answer. By the time she came in from the circle Thursday morning, the kitchen was different. Not dramatically different, not in the way of ceremony or announcement. The 6 people around the table were the same 6 people who were always around the table, but the quality of the air in the room was changed. She walked in and they looked at her, not with the looking through of people who have decided you are invisible, and not with the staring of people confronting something they don't know how to manage. They looked at her the way you look at someone you have been watching for weeks and have now confirmed what you suspected. Owen was already on his feet, which was unusual for early morning Owen, and he was looking at her with his honest face arranged in an expression that could only be described as delighted relief. "The silver wolf that everyone is pretending they didn't see in the training circle this morning," he said, "is you." "Yes," she said. "And the Alpha King, who is currently in the main building doing administrative work, with the composure of a man who absolutely did not drive through the early morning hours to get here." "Owen," she said. "I'm just confirming the facts," he said. She sat down. Maggie put coffee in front of her without being asked. Dev was looking at the table with the expression of someone trying very hard to be appropriate about something that was making him extremely loud internally. Nina was not looking up from her bowl, but both her hands were around the mug in a way that suggested she was paying more attention than usual. Glenn was smiling at the window. "Are you going to say something?" Dev said, and Owen said Dev, the way he always said Dev. And Dev said, "I'm just," and Owen said Dev. Ilara wrapped her hands around her mug. She looked at these people who had fed her oatmeal and argued about supply schedules, and said 4-word devastating things, and not looked up from their bowls and handed her wrenches she didn't need. These people who had learned her name when no one else was bothering to. "I shifted yesterday afternoon," she said. "First time. Silver Wolf. The Alpha King arrived this morning. That's all I know is true right now. The rest of it is still becoming." Owen sat back down. He looked at her with the honest face that she had come to trust more than almost any other face she had ever known. "Good," he said. "That's a lot. That's enough." "It's enough," she agreed. She drank her coffee. The kitchen returned to its morning texture. Dev's complaint, the scrape of chairs, the smell of toast. She sat inside it, and felt the warmth of it, and was glad. After breakfast, she went to find Agnes. Agnes was in her room this time, not the herb garden, a small room off the east wing that Ilara had not been inside before. But Agnes left the door open in the mornings, which was an invitation for people who understood how Agnes communicated. She knocked on the doorframe. Agnes was at her desk with a cup of tea and a book that was older than most of the archive records Ilara had been reading. She looked up. "Silver," Agnes said. "Yes," Ilara said. Agnes nodded once in the way of someone receiving a confirmation of something they have been waiting for. "Come in." Ilara sat in the chair across the desk. Between them, the tea and the old book and the morning light through the one small window. "What changes now?" Ilara asked. Agnes turned the question over, which meant she had more to say than a simple answer. "Practically," she said, "you can shift. You can run. You can participate in pack activities that require a wolf form. You can apply for formal pack affiliation through the regional council, which changes your legal standing from guest resident to established member." She paused. "The Luna marker, now that the wolf has awakened, will be more active. Other wolves near you will feel it. They may not be able to name what they're feeling, but the effects will be present. Effects like the historical records described," Ilara said. "Stability. Reduced aggression. Among others," Agnes said. "There's also an effect on decision-making. Packs in proximity to an active Luna bearer historically make better collective decisions, less fear-driven, more coherent." She looked at her steadily. "This is why the old northern packs considered the Luna bearer essential rather than ceremonial. Not because she was a figurehead, because her presence actively improved the functioning of the community. Alara sat with this. That's a significant responsibility. Yes, Agnes said, which is why it matters enormously that it is carried by someone who understands the difference between service and servitude. She held her gaze. You do. You've learned it the hard way. The hardest way, Alara said. Agnes looked at her. Your grandmother understood it from birth. It was a gift she was given. You had to build it from material that was not kindly given. A pause. That makes it stronger, in some ways. Things built under pressure tend to hold better than things inherited. Alara thought about her father's handwriting on the transfer document, about the chain on her wrist, about a cold room in the East Wing and 6 people at a kitchen table who had not treated her like a placeholder. What should I do first? She asked. Train, Agnes said. Continue learning the sequences. Your wolf will add a dimension to the training you haven't had access to yet. She picked up her tea. And speak with the Alpha King. Not about practical matters. About what both of you want. Alara looked at her. We've been speaking about practical matters because you have both been being very careful, Agnes said. You have been careful because you have not trusted carefulness before. He has been careful because he understands your history with not being given choices. She put her tea down. Both reasons are good. Both reasons have served their purpose. She held Alara's gaze with the clear eyes of someone who has no investment in being comfortable. It is appropriate to stop being careful now. Alara sat in the room with Agnes and the morning light and the old book and thought about what it meant to stop being careful. Not to become reckless. To stop managing the distance between herself and things she wanted because she had spent so long believing that wanting was how you located your vulnerabilities. All right, she said. Agnes picked up her book. Close the door on your way out, she said. Alara found him in the small working room, which had apparently become their shared office by default, without either of them arranging it. He was at the table with documents spread around him, doing the work he had come to do. The border follow-up from the previous visit, the formal communication with the regional council regarding her status, and whatever else crossed a sovereign alpha's desk when he was not actively mediating territorial disputes. She came in. She closed the door. She sat in the chair across from him. He looked up. He put his pen down. Agnes told me to stop being careful, she said. He was very still. What did you tell her? That she was right, Alara said. He looked at her. She looked back. The bond was vivid and present, and the scar was warm, and she was tired. Not from exhaustion, from the long effort of holding herself at a managed distance from what she actually felt, which had been necessary and was now, as Agnes had said, no longer the point. I want to be honest with you, she said. I have been honest, but I've been honest the way you are when you're being careful, only saying the things that are true and leaving out the things you're not ready to say. She pressed her hands flat on the table. I'm not in love with you. I want to be honest about that too. I don't know you well enough for that yet. What I know is that you are the person in my life who has most consistently done what he said he would do, and that the bond is real, and that I want to know you better, and that I am done managing the distance. He was quiet for a moment, the long, honest quiet. I have been careful, he said, because I know your history, and I have not wanted to be another person who moves the pieces of your life without your consent. He held her gaze. I have also been careful because it has been a long time since anything required this much care from me, and I have been trying to do it correctly. And, she said. And I also want to know you better, he said. And the bond is real. And I have thought about nothing except you and the wolf and the clearing, and this compound for 3 weeks straight, which is unusual for me, and which I am choosing to take seriously. She looked at him. He looked at her. The careful distance was a thing that had existed between them and had been managed well and had served its purpose and was now, by mutual acknowledgement, something neither of them needed anymore. What happens now? She said. Now, he said, and there was something at the corner of his mouth that was closer to a full smile than she had seen from him. I think you should come with me to the regional council meeting next month. Not as my guest, as the Luna bearer, in your own right, as a registered participant in the council process. She looked at him. That's the practical answer. You said you wanted to know me better, he said. Watching me work is the fastest way. I'm not particularly interesting otherwise. That is not true, she said. I'm primarily work, he said, and said it without apology. The way a person states something true about themselves. It's the largest part of what I am. I know, she said. I've been watching you work for weeks. That's partly why I want to know you better. He looked at her with the expression she had finally named. Not just the door open, but the person in the doorway, present and visible and not retreating back inside. The council meeting is in 6 weeks, he said. In the Eastern Territory, 3 days. I'll need to formally apply for council recognition, she said. The Luna bearer status will need to be documented. I've already begun the filing, he said. She looked at him. When? The day I got your message about the shift. She breathed. She thought about this. And if I hadn't agreed to come, then I would have filed it anyway, he said. The recognition is yours regardless. You don't need my involvement to claim it. He held her gaze. But I thought you might want company. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who arranged things and then stepped back and let her find them. Who had begun a filing the day she shifted and would have submitted it whether or not she came along. Yes, she said. I want company. The 6 weeks moved with a different quality than anything before them. Not slower, not faster, more intentional. She trained every morning. She learned the 6th and 7th sequences from Bex and spent a week on the 8th, which was the most complex of all of them. A full defensive combination that used the opponent's force against itself at every stage. She trained in wolf form some mornings, which was entirely different and required a new language of instinct that she was developing in parallel with the human form training. She helped Owen with a compound maintenance project that had been deferred for 2 seasons. She continued the supply schedule. She had long conversations with Nina about medicinal plants that were some of the most substantive conversations of her life, delivered in Nina's characteristic economy of words. She spent time with him, some of it working. She sat in on the formal communications, learned the structure of the regional council's processes, contributed twice to the drafting of his position papers in ways that he accepted without comment, and incorporated without credit, which she appreciated for the correctness of it. Some of it not working, walks in the pine yards in the evenings, the training circle in the mornings on the days he was there, the occasional dinner in the kitchen that Owen orchestrated with the careful casualness of someone arranging a thing while appearing to be doing nothing. She learned him. He was, as he had said, primarily work. The work was everything, the territories, the packs, the slow, careful architecture of something better than what existed. He thought about it the way other people breathe. It was not obsession. It was the thing his particular mind had been shaped to do, and which it did, with the complete, efficient attention of something working correctly. He was also, underneath this, a person who noticed things, small things, who had a dry register of humor that surfaced rarely, and when it did was precise, who did not sleep enough, who had, she discovered, a habit of working through meals that Owen addressed by the simple method of putting food in front of him without asking. She told him things, not everything. She was not a person who gave everything at once, and she had not changed that about herself. But the things she told him were real ones. About the library she had built in her room at Ashwood, one borrowed book at a time. About the cedar smell of the house and how she missed it as a smell even though she did not miss the house. About learning the training sequences without being taught, and what that had felt like. The strange, specific rightness of it. He listened the way he did everything, fully, without wasting attention on the wrong things. She told him things and they became part of what he held about her, and she trusted that they would be held correctly. She received a letter from her mother 3 weeks before the council meeting, short, in her mother's careful handwriting. She had spoken to the Ashwood pack healer about the Luna line. She had found a contact at the northern settlements, an elder who remembered Vera. She wanted Alara to know. She wrote back. The response was carefully worded and real, and it was not forgiveness. She was not ready to call it that yet. And she was not going to use the word until she meant it. But it was contact. It was a door left slightly open from her side, which was more than a dark closed door, and which was the truth of where she was. She filed it with the other documents against her ribs, and let it be what it was. On the morning they were supposed to leave for the council meeting, she was in the training circle at 5 in the morning, for the last time before the trip, and she ran all 8 sequences from beginning to end, in wolf form for the first time. And the 8 sequences in wolf form were something else entirely. Something that had no adequate word in the language she had available yet. Something she would need new language to describe. Something complete. She shifted back. She stood in the circle. She breathed. The sky above the pines was black and the stars were still fully present and the compound was quiet. She pressed her fingers to her collarbone. The warmth was there, steady, the same as it had been since the beginning, the same mark that had been there since she was 8 years old, the same pulse, but named now, known. Not a mystery, a fact. She was ready. The regional council met in a hall that had been in continuous use for 130 years. She knew this because the stone of it said so, not literally, not with an inscription, but in the way that old stone speaks, with the particular density of years that have settled into it. The hall was in the Eastern Territory, the city of Drenfeld, which she had not visited before and which was not a city in the way of human settlements, but was a city in the way of pack territories, a center, a gathering point, a place where things had been decided for long enough that the decision-making had become part of the architecture. She arrived with Caius and his formal advisory group, which was how the council had been formally notified, the Alpha King attending with the registered Luna Bearer as an independent council participant. The notification had apparently caused a reaction in the council that Caius had described, with characteristic understatement, as significant. She did not have the experience to know what significant looked like in a formal council context. She was about to learn. The council chamber held 22 representatives from the 4 territorial regions. She had studied their names and pack affiliations in the 2 weeks before the visit and could match most of the faces as they filed in. Most of them looked at her, some with curiosity, some with the particular assessment of people determining whether something is a threat or an opportunity, several with a quality she could not immediately name and which took her until she was seated at the council table to identify. They were uncertain. Not of her. They had no relationship with her, nothing to be uncertain about yet. They were uncertain of each other, of the room, of how to proceed in a situation they had no template for. The Luna Bearer had not attended a regional council in 60 years. The records agreed on this point. Whatever template they were working from was therefore decades old, assembled from documentation and oral tradition rather than experience. She found, sitting in that room, that she was not nervous. This was notable enough that she examined it. She had expected to be nervous, walking into a formal chamber of 22 established territorial representatives as a 22-year-old woman who had been a guest resident of a mid-sized pack 3 months ago. She had expected the nervousness of previous contexts, family dinners where she was invisible, pack gatherings where her lack of wolf was the primary thing people saw. She was not nervous, she was attentive. There was a difference, and she felt it clearly. The council session opened with the formal acknowledgement of participants, which Caius led in his capacity as Sovereign Alpha with the same even precision he applied to everything. He acknowledged her last, with the specific language of formal council tradition, the registered Luna Bearer, Elara Voss of the Northern Bloodline, participating in independent standing. The room went through a particular quality of silence when he said it, not because of the words themselves but because the words were true and the room felt it. The Luna marker was active here. She had been aware of it on the drive, in the Drenfeld city boundaries, walking into the hall, a steady outward quality, like a second body of warmth extending from the scar on her collarbone into the space around her. The council members, some of whom had shifted into their wolves on their way into the hall according to the traditional greeting practice, were responding to it the way the archive records had described. A settling, a coherence, a quality of attention that turned toward the center. She was the center. She sat with this and did not perform it. She had learned from the records and from Agnes, and from 3 months of paying careful attention, that the marker did not require performance. It simply was. It worked the way gravity works. You do not announce it. You do not explain it. You simply stand in it, and the rest follows. The first item on the council agenda was the formal response to the Ashwood transfer matter. She had known this was coming. Caius had told her it would be on the agenda, and had given her the option to step out during the relevant portion. She had declined. She was not going to be absent from the room when her own history was discussed. The council representative from the southern region read the formal complaint that had been filed by the Ashwood Pack leadership, a carefully worded document arguing that the Alpha King's administrative intervention in the transfer agreement had exceeded his authority. Elara listened to it with her hands flat on the table and her face arranged in the careful neutrality she had spent 22 years developing and which she now understood as a tool rather than a defense. Caius responded. He was brief and exact. The legal framework he cited was old pack covenant law, not his own authority. The covenants predated every current pack by at least 2 generations and could not be overridden by individual pack agreements. The transfer agreement had violated 3 specific covenant protections for unmated women in cross-pack exchanges. He laid these out with the flat precision of someone who has done the reading and is citing the page numbers. The response from the room was nearly physical. Not from all 22. Some remained neutral, some were calculating. But the majority of the chamber was responding to the legal clarity of it the way the archive records said council chambers responded when an active Luna Bearer was present. Better collective thinking. Less reflexive defensiveness. One of the northern representatives said, "The Ashwood complaint is without standing," before any vote was called, and several others nodded, and the formal vote when it came was 18 in favor of Caius's original determination, 3 abstentions, 1 dissent. 1 dissent. From a southern representative whose pack had historical alliance with Ashwood. She filed this for later. After the first session, there was a midday recess. She stood in the courtyard outside the hall with a cup of tea someone had pressed into her hand, and several council members came to speak to her individually. Not about formal business. About her. Questions about her background, about the bloodline, about the Ironmore stay, asked with varying degrees of diplomatic framing and varying degrees of genuine curiosity underneath it. She answered clearly, without performance, without managing what they thought of her. She had nothing to gain from impression management and nothing to lose from honesty. A woman came toward the end of the recess period, tall, mid-50s, with the bearing of someone who has been making large decisions for a long time. She introduced herself as the senior representative from the Eastern region. She looked at Alara with the specific quality of assessment that Alara recognized as thorough and respectful simultaneously. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" Alara asked. "Something more ceremonial," the woman said. "Something that knew it was important." She looked at her steadily. "You know you're important, and you don't need it." "I'm a person," Alara said. "The marker is something I carry. The two things are related but not identical." The woman studied her for another moment. "The council would benefit from your formal participation going forward. Not as a guest, as a registered participant with speaking rights." "I'd need to establish formal PAC affiliation first," Alara said. "Yes," the woman said. "There are several options. The Eastern Territory maintains a formal registry for independent practitioners who do not hold single PAC affiliation. Given the nature of the Luna marker, which by historical tradition does not belong to any single PAC, that registry might be the appropriate home for your formal status." Alara looked at her. She had not considered this option. She had been thinking about PAC affiliation in the traditional sense, choosing a PAC, belonging to it, being of it. She had not thought about the older tradition in which some roles existed outside the PAC structure, precisely because they served the whole. "I'd like to review the registry requirements," she said. "I'll have the documentation sent to you," the woman said. She extended her hand. Alara took it. They shook. She went back inside for the afternoon session with the independent registry sitting in her mind alongside everything else, another piece of a shape that was becoming clearer. The afternoon session ran long. 3 territorial disputes, each requiring mediation. She watched Caius work and thought, "He is right. He is the most accurate person I have ever watched in a room like this." He did not take sides. He found the location of genuine disagreement beneath the stated positions, which were almost always proxies for something deeper, and he named the something deeper in language both sides could receive, and the path forward became visible. She watched 2 of the 3 disputes resolve within the session. The third, a land claim between the western and southern regions over a forest corridor, required additional documentation and was tabled for the following day. The southern representative who had dissented on the Ashwood matter was the loudest voice in this dispute, and she noted the pattern, which would need to be addressed at some point. After the evening session closed, she went to the room she had been assigned in the council residence, a larger room than her Ironmore East Wing space, better furnished, with a window facing the Drenfeld city lights rather than pines. She sat at the desk and took out her documents and worked for an hour. A knock at her door. She opened it. "Caius, you were watching the southern representative," he said. No preamble. He had been watching her watch. "He's coordinating the Ashwood alliance more actively than his formal position suggests," she said. "The dissent on the transfer matter and the objection in the forest corridor dispute are connected. He's building a position." "Yes," he said. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, not entering without being invited, which was one of his habits she had noted. "What do you think the position is?" She thought about it. "He wants to establish a precedent that the Alpha King's administrative authority over PAC-level agreements is more limited than current covenant law suggests," she said. "If he can get the council to narrow the interpretation of the covenants, Ashwood gets more protection from the transfer ruling, and he builds influence among the PACs that resent central oversight." Caius looked at her. "That matches my assessment exactly. What are you going to do about it?" "Talk to him," he said. "Tomorrow morning, before the session." "What will you say?" "I'll find out what he actually wants," he said. "Not the position. The thing under it." He said it the way he had done everything she had watched him do. Practically, without drama. There's usually something real underneath. Even in the worst faith arguments, there's a genuine grievance somewhere. If I can find it and address it directly, the argument loses its foundation. She leaned against her side of the doorframe. They stood at the threshold like that. Him in the hall, her in the room, the door between them like a boundary that was technically there but was not doing any active work anymore. I spoke to the Eastern Territory senior representative, she said. She mentioned the independent practitioner registry. He nodded. She spoke to me about it too. Did you arrange that? No, he said. She came to the conclusion herself. Which is better? She looked at him. He was tired. She could see it now more clearly than in the morning. 3 sessions, 6 hours of formal mediation, administrative correspondence in the breaks. He had driven through the early hours to reach Ironmore and then traveled again within the same week. You need to sleep, she said. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression moved, the management dropping, briefly. I sleep adequately, he said. Adequately, she said, with the particular inflection that indicated the inadequacy of adequate. He almost smiled. She was learning the geography of that almost smile, the exact conditions that produced it, and what it meant. I'll sleep after I finish the 3rd disputes documentation review. It can be done in the morning. In the morning I'm meeting with the Southern representative. She looked at him. He looked back. The threshold between them was not a distance, she had understood for some time. It was a choice. The same choice they were both making each time they stood at any version of it. She stepped back from the door, not closing it, making room. He came in. He sat in the desk chair while she sat on the edge of the bed, and she pulled the documentation she had been working on and passed it to him, and they went through the 3rd dispute's relevant documents together for an hour, in the good productive silence of 2 people who trust each other's thinking. She caught 2 errors in the boundary mapping. He restructured the formal response she had been drafting in a way that was cleaner than her version, and she acknowledged this without pride, because she was not someone who needed to have been the one who did it best. She needed the thing to be done well. At some point after 11 he put the documents down and she became aware that his eyes were closed. She looked at him, in the chair at her desk, his head slightly bowed, the documents still in his hands, the careful management of the day's exhaustion finally failing. She took the documents carefully from his hands. He did not wake. She covered him with the spare blanket from the foot of the bed and left the lamp on low and took her own documents to the window seat where the city lights came in and worked there instead. And the bond was a steady, warm thing, close and present and completely at ease, and outside the Drenfeld city hummed gently in the night. She thought about the council session and the independent registry and the Southern representative's coordinated position. She thought about documents and covenants and the slow, careful work of building something worth holding. She thought about a man asleep in her desk chair because she had made room and he had come in and the exhaustion had finally found somewhere to set down. She pressed her fingers to her collarbone. The scar was warm. She was here. She was in a council residence in Drenfeld on the first night of a 3-day formal session, and she was a registered council participant in her own right, and the bond was close and true, and the world she was building was beginning to take a shape she recognized. She kept working until past midnight, and then she went to sleep on the bed with her documents on the nightstand and her collarbone warm and the lamp burning low, and in the morning he was gone from the chair and there was a note on the desk that said, Southern Representative at 7. Thank you for the blanket. She looked at the note for a moment. Then she put it with the other documents against her ribs. She went to get ready for the second day of council sessions. The second day of council sessions began at 8. She was in the chamber before most of the representatives arrived, sitting at the long table with her documentation and a cup of coffee, and the particular quality of early morning focus that she had cultivated over months of 5 o'clock training circles. She noted which representatives came in together and which sat apart. She noted the Southern representative arriving with a folder that was thicker than yesterday's, new documentation, which meant he had been working overnight too. Caius came in at 3 minutes before 8. He looked rested. He nodded at her across the room. She nodded back. She had no idea when he had slept, but he clearly had, which was the outcome that mattered. The session opened with the 3rd dispute's formal review, which she had helped prepare. The Southern representative, she had learned his name was Paul Ward, PAC affiliation the Redmere PAC in the Southern Corridor, presented his additional documentation with the practiced fluency of someone who had been preparing this argument for several sessions. It was good. She could see why Caius had wanted to speak to him before the session, because Ward was not working in bad faith. The documentation he presented actually identified a genuine ambiguity in the forest corridor boundary mapping that had been papered over in the original settlement 30 years ago. Caius had found it too. She could see it in his expression when Ward laid the documentation on the table, not surprise, recognition. He had been to exactly the same place in the documents and had arrived at the same genuine problem. What happened next was the most interesting thing she had seen in the council context. Caius put aside the prepared position paper. She could see him deciding to do this, setting it aside physically on the table, and said, to Ward directly and to the chamber, "The representative from the South has identified something real. The boundary ambiguity exists. The question is not whether to acknowledge it but how to address it in a way that serves both territories equitably." Ward went still, not suspicious still, recalibrating still. He had prepared for a defense of his position. He had not prepared for the Alpha King to agree with the underlying substance of it. Caius continued, "I'd like to propose a joint survey process. 3 representatives from each affected territory, plus a neutral archivist from the Eastern Registry. They map the corridor as it exists currently, identify the ambiguous section, and bring a recommendation back to Council within 90 days. He looked around the chamber. No position defended. No historical argument relitigated. Just the facts of what the land is now. A silence. Ward looked at the documents in front of him. She could see him making calculations. "That's acceptable," Ward said. 17 representatives voiced agreement before the formal vote was called. It passed unanimously. She sat at the long table and watched the chamber settle into the particular quality that the records described. Coherent, less defensive, directed toward resolution rather than victory. And she thought about what the marker did in a room, and what she was doing in a room, and whether those two things were the same. She thought they were not entirely the same. The marker provided conditions. She was a person who made choices inside those conditions. The two things worked together, but they were not identical. She was not the marker. She was the person who carried it. This distinction felt important. She held it. After the morning session broke for a midday recess, Ward came to speak to her. She was at the window of the corridor outside the chamber, looking at the Drenfeld courtyard below, when she heard him approach. She had expected this would happen. She did not turn immediately. "The Luna Bearer," he said. He said it not as a title but as an identification. "This is what I understand you to be." "Ilara Voss," she said. She turned. He was perhaps 50, with the face of someone who had been in council rooms for enough years that he no longer found the rooms particularly impressive, only the work that happened in them. He was looking at her with an expression she was learning to recognize as the particular uncertainty of someone who has had an assumption overturned. "You were at Ironmore," he said. "I am at Ironmore," she said. "Before that, Ashwood." "I was born in Ashwood," she said. "I live in Ironmore. I hold formal status through the Alpha King's administrative registry." She held his gaze. "Is there something you wanted to ask me directly, or are we going to approach it indirectly?" He almost smiled. "You're not what I expected," he said. She had heard this twice now. "I know," she said. "What did you expect?" "Something more." He paused. "Managed. I expected someone performing a role." "I'm not performing anything," she said. "I'm present." He looked at her for a moment. "Redmere Pack has been managing a low-level internal conflict for 8 months, he said, and said it the way someone says something they have not been saying to the relevant people, the thing that has been sitting under the arguments. Territorial boundary disputes with 2 neighbor packs, 2 internal succession questions, pack member retention issues, the kind of slow destabilization that doesn't have a single cause." He looked at the courtyard. "I came into this session prepared to argue hard, because I needed to demonstrate competence to my pack council, because they're losing faith in the formal processes." She stood with this for a moment. "And the Ashwood Alliance?" she asked. "An old loyalty," he said. "Their Alpha and mine grew up together. I owe him a professional defense. But," he stopped. "The transfer agreement was wrong, I know that." "Yes," she said. He was quiet. She could feel the marker doing whatever it did, not changing his thinking, not compelling him, just making the room honest enough that the honest thing was easier to say. "Your pack council is losing faith in formal processes," she said, "because the formal processes haven't addressed the actual problem, which is the slow destabilization. The boundary disputes and succession questions are symptoms. What's the root?" He looked at her. "A resource allocation decision from 4 years ago," he said. "The Southern Corridor rezoning took productive land from 3 lower-ranked Redmere settlements and gave the yields to a higher-ranked Alliance pack. It was legal. It was also wrong in the practical sense. Those 3 settlements have been contracting since." She looked at him. "That's something the Regional Council can address," she said, "if it's put on the record as a formal grievance, rather than expressed through proxy arguments about boundary surveys." "The Alpha King would hear that?" he said. And the question was not cynical. It was the question of someone who has not believed in formal processes for long enough that he has forgotten the processes were designed for exactly this. "He heard about the boundary ambiguity today," she said. "When you put it on the record directly, yes, he addresses what's actually there." Ward looked at the courtyard for a long moment. I'll bring a formal grievance on the Redmere rezoning, he said. To the next session. Good, she said. He left. She stood at the window and looked at the courtyard and felt the marker steady in her collarbone and thought about what Agnes had said. Better collective decisions, less fear-driven, more coherent. She thought about what she had done in that conversation. Not the marker, but her. Found the genuine grievance underneath the proxy argument, given it a legitimate path. Both things. The marker providing conditions and her making choices inside them. The afternoon session was the sharpest, most productive 3 hours she had witnessed. 4 agenda items resolved cleanly. 2 new formal processes established. The independent registry formalized with her as its first registered participant, which the Eastern Territory representative moved and the chamber passed with only 1 abstention. She signed the registry documentation at the council table in front of 22 representatives and felt, putting pen to paper, the particular weight of a thing that was permanent and earned. On the 3rd morning, before the final session, she went to the small garden at the back of the council residence. It was not a training space. Just a garden, winter bare, geometric, with stone paths between dormant beds. She walked the paths in the early light and thought about the 3 days and what she was carrying forward from them. She had a formal council status. She had an address for Ward's grievance which she intended to follow up on independently of the formal process. She had a clear picture of the council chamber's dynamics and the specific locations of resistance and openness. She had a beginning. She thought about the word beginning. She had been in the beginning of things for months. The kitchen table with the oatmeal, the library floor with the ecology book, the training circle at 5 in the morning before the compound woke, the clearing in the northern forest. These had all been beginnings. She was tired of beginnings, she realized. She was ready for the part that came after. She heard him before she saw him. He came through the garden gate with 2 cups of coffee and the look of a man who has been up since before the garden acquired its current light quality, which was early. She took the cup. "Thank you," she said. They walked the garden paths together. The stone was cold under their feet, and the dormant beds smelled of earth and dried herbs and the winter quality of things that were not gone but were held. "Ward is going to file a formal grievance on the Redmere rezoning at the next session," she said. "I know," he said. "He told me after the afternoon session." She looked at him. "He found you?" "He did," Caius said. He said the Luna Bearer had helped him see that there was a legitimate path for the genuine problem. He held her gaze over the rim of his coffee cup. He was right. She looked at the path ahead of them. "The independent registry gives me standing to follow up on cases like that," she said. "Between formal sessions, as an independent participant rather than as a PAC representative." She had been thinking about this since the signing. There's a whole category of genuine grievances that get lost between sessions because they don't fit cleanly into PAC territory disputes. They're structural. They're about allocation and fairness. "Yes," he said. "I could be useful in that space," she said. "Not on your behalf. On the council's behalf. Independently." He was quiet for a moment. "You'd need a base of operations. Somewhere central enough to work from but not formally aligned with any single territory. The Eastern Registry would house my formal records," she said. "But I'm not bound to a location." She looked at him. "I could operate from Ironmore for now and expand the base as the role develops." "Ironmore," he said. He said it with the care of someone who has heard a word that has a specific weight in a specific context. "That's where my life is," she said. "Currently." He stopped walking. She stopped too. They were at the center of the garden where the paths crossed, and the light was cold and clear and the city was beginning to wake around the residence walls. He looked at her with the expression that was not the door opening anymore. The door was open, had been open for months. What she was looking at now was the room. "I have been trying," he said, "to be very precise about not assuming what you mean when you say things like that." "I know," she said. "I'm being precise now. Ironmore is where my life is. You are in my life. The 2 facts are not unrelated." He was still. "What are you saying, Alara?" She held his gaze. "I'm saying that I want to complete the bond," she said. "Not because of the biology. Not because of the records. Because of the blanket and the training circle and the documentation you filed before I asked you to. And the honest answers you gave me when I asked hard questions," she breathed. "Because you are the person in the world who has most consistently seen me as a person with choices, and I want to choose you." The garden was very quiet. He put his coffee cup down on the path's stone edge and stepped toward her and stopped just inside the careful distance, which was gone now, which had been gone for a long time if she was being honest. And she was being honest. He said, "I have wanted nothing else since the library floor," and his voice had the quality she had heard from him only once before, when he had been asleep in her chair, and she had taken the documents from his hands, and the management had been down. She closed the remaining distance. The bond completed like a door finally swinging all the way open. Not thunder, not fire, an opening. Like the clearing in the northern forest, but interior. Something resolving into its correct shape. Something that had been reaching in two directions finally finding the thing it was reaching toward. She felt it in her collarbone and in her chest, and in the wolf, and in every place that had been carrying the warmth of it for months. And she felt it in him too. The bond running between them now in both directions. Full and clear, and absolutely real. They stood in the winter garden with the city waking around them, and the cold air and the coffee going cold on the path's edge, and she felt the scar on her collarbone pulse once, warm and complete, and then settle into a warmth that was different from anything that had come before. Not waiting anymore. Just there, just warm, just theirs. The third council session ran 4 hours. She participated formally for the first time, not just as an observer, but as a registered independent participant with speaking rights. She used them twice, once to identify an ambiguity in a border documentation package that would have caused problems 3 sessions hence if not caught now, once to ask a question of a representative that reframed his stated position in a way that helped him see his own argument more clearly. Caius did not look at her when she spoke. He listened with the same quality of attention he gave everything, but she could feel, through the bond, the particular resonance of it, not pride. Something quieter, something that was simply the recognition of watching someone be exactly who they are. After the session closed, there were the formal goodbyes, the documentation exchanges, the planning of future sessions. She spoke to the Eastern Territory representative about her registry implementation. She exchanged contact information with 2 other representatives who had asked. She answered questions from a younger council staff member about the Luna Line documentation with the same directness she had answered every question in the past 3 days. At some point in all of this, she became aware that the council chamber no longer felt foreign. It felt like a place she had been working, which was different, which was what it now was. They drove back to Ironmore the following morning. Not in convoy, not yet, not for this. One vehicle, him driving, the road through the territories moving past, the late winter light pale and clear. She had her feet up on the dashboard and her documentation on her knees, and the bond was vivid and close in the way it had been since the garden in Drenfeld. The new quality of it, full, resolved, directional in both directions simultaneously, something she was still learning the texture of. She would be learning it for a long time, she thought, the texture of a bond fully formed, the texture of a life being built, the texture of choosing rather than being chosen. She thought about Owen and Maggie and Dev and Nina and Glenn and Agnes, and the kitchen with its long table, and Bex and the training circle, and the library with the military history and the hidden romance novels, and her room in the east wing facing the pines. She thought about the 8th sequence in wolf form at 5 in the morning before the world woke. She thought about a blue scarf that smelled of lavender and pine resin, about a photograph of a woman in northern light looking at something funny just outside the frame. She pressed her hand to her collarbone. The warmth was different now, deeper, more settled, like the difference between a fire you are tending and a fire that has been burning long enough to have become the room's nature. "What are you thinking?" he asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "About all of it," she said. "The whole shape of it from the beginning." "And?" She looked at the road. The pines were coming back into view, the darker, deeper north, the pines of Ironmore territory. Home was not a word she had trusted for a long time, but she was close to trusting it now. "I think," she said, "that I was always going to end up here. In a vehicle going north," he said. "That too," she said. "But here, in this specific configuration of things, this exact shape." She thought about the chain on her wrist, and the cold dark van, and the kitchen with the oatmeal, and she thought about how none of it had made her something diminished, and all of it had made her something truer. It's strange. Everything that was done to hurt me or use me or erase me, none of it worked. It pointed me here instead. He was quiet for a moment. "Does that make it all right?" he asked, not dismissive, genuinely asking. "No," she said. "It was wrong. It will stay wrong." She looked at the pines. "But the wrong thing and the true thing can both be true at once. The harm was real and I'm also exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm learning to hold both." He nodded. The pines moved at the edge of the road. The bond was warm and clear. She looked at his hands on the wheel, the same hands that had shown her the 4th sequence in the dark training circle, that had covered hers on his chest in the morning light. She was going to know those hands for a very long time. She looked at the road ahead of them. She was 22 years old. She had a formal council registration, a research project on structural allocation grievances, 8 combat sequences in wolf form, a note on her desk from a man who had been grateful for a blanket, a grandmother she had never met who lived in a photograph on her bedside table looking at something funny. She had a life, not the one anyone had planned for her, not the one that had been decided for her, handed to her, taken from her, the one she was building. She kept her hand on her collarbone and let the warmth of it hold her, and watched the Ironmore pines come closer through the windshield, and she thought about tomorrow, about the training circle, and the 9th sequence that Bex had promised to show her, and the supply schedule, and Nina's forward commentary on the universe, and Owen's honest face, and the long kitchen table where she had eaten her first bowl of oatmeal in a foreign place and been called by her name. She thought about all the good things that came after bad ones. She breathed the air of the Northern Territory, which smelled of pine and cold earth, and the particular quality of a place that had been waiting for her without knowing it was waiting. The compound gate came into view. She was home. She was choosing it. She was choosing all of it, the work and the people and the bond and the wolf and the long, slow building of something worth having. She was choosing herself. The gate opened. The vehicle moved through it. The pines were dark and the compound was lit, and Owen's truck was in the yard, and she could see, through the kitchen window, the yellow light and the movement of people who would look up when she came in. She got out of the vehicle and stood in the yard in the cold night and breathed, and the scar on her collarbone was warm and quiet and complete. Still here, still here, still here. She walked toward the kitchen light. She walked in.